Hey guys, tonight we delve into a story that has haunted the annals of the paranormal world for decades. A story that involves an innocuous object, a doll seemingly innocent, yet carrying with it a dark history that has been the subject of fear and fascination. Picture it now, a small, quaint room in a house that feels too quiet. The air is still, and the only sound is the soft ticking of an old grandfather clock. In the corner of the room, beneath the dim light of a single bulb, rests a doll. Not just any doll, this one has eyes that seem too lifelike, too aware. Its clothes are tattered, and its smile, if you could call it that, is unsettling, as though the expression was sewn into its face with intent. It's called Robert, the doll, that started it all. Now, before you settle in too comfortably, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It was a humid summer day in Key West when the infamous Robert doll first began its dark journey through history. A small, well-preserved house, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, had been the home to a peculiar family. The Otto family was just like any other at first glance. However, their tale would soon intertwine with a dark entity that had been quietly waiting for years. It started when Robert Eugene Otto, a young boy from the Otto family, was given a strange gift by one of the family's servants, a doll that seemed harmless enough. But this was no ordinary toy. Standing at around 3 feet tall, with a round face of porcelain and eyes that glistened unnaturally, Robert was dressed in a sailor's outfit, a uniform that seemed too formal for such a toy. Robert Eugene took an instant liking to the doll. He named it Robert, a name that was almost too coincidental, as if it had been whispered to him by the very thing that had given it life. The doll was placed in a small chair in Robert Eugene's room, positioned just so facing the bed where the child slept. At first, the family didn't think much of it, but soon, odd things began to happen. The first sign was the way the doll seemed to move. It wasn't just an illusion of a child's imagination. No, the positions of Robert would change during the night. His arms would be raised. His head turned, his eyes fixed on different parts of the room. Robert Eugene's parents began hearing strange noises in the night, scraping sounds, soft giggles, whispers, and at times the unmistakable sound of someone running down the hall. The parents thought it was just the wind, the house settling, or perhaps their son simply playing with the doll in his sleep. But Robert Eugene would always insist that Robert was the one making the noises. "I didn't do it, Mom," he would say, his small voice filled with certainty. Robert did. The family shrugged it off at first, dismissing it as harmless childish imagination. After all, what could a doll possibly do? But things began to escalate. One evening, the Otto family gathered around for dinner. It was an ordinary family affair, nothing out of the ordinary. But the sound of loud, frantic thuds from the attic suddenly interrupted their meal. The noise sounded like something or someone was knocking against the walls. The family rushed to the attic to find nothing. Yet, as they made their way back down, they noticed something odd. Robert was no longer in his chair as he had been when they left the room. He was standing by the window, staring out into the night. That night, Robert Eugene woke up in a cold sweat. The room was silent, but the darkness felt oppressive. He could barely make out the outline of Robert sitting at the foot of his bed, the doll's head turned slightly towards him. The young boy felt his heartbeat quicken, and a sense of dread overtook him as he watched the doll. It was as if its eyes were alive, tracking his every movement. The following weeks brought more unsettling occurrences. Objects in the house would be found in places they shouldn't have been. Family members would hear faint laughter coming from the room where Robert sat. Sometimes they would hear a soft, familiar voice calling Robert Eugene's name, though no one was there. And then Robert Eugene started to change. The once joyful and energetic boy grew quieter. He became withdrawn, and on several occasions, the family found him speaking to the doll, asking it questions in a tone that didn't seem quite like his own. The words that came from Robert Eugene's mouth were increasingly strange, like they weren't his at all. "I'm not afraid of you, Robert," he would say, looking into the doll's unblinking eyes. "You can't hurt me." But Robert's presence began to grow stronger. It wasn't just the doll anymore. It seemed to have affected the house itself. Rooms grew colder, doors slammed shut on their own, and the whispers grew louder. The family was desperate to figure out what was happening, but no one could explain it. It was as though something was inside the house, pulling the strings controlling the very fabric of reality itself. It wasn't until one night when the family's maid, who had been with them for years, confessed that she had cursed the doll, that the family finally realized what was going on. She had placed an ancient curse on Robert, believing that the doll would bring harm to the Otto family. She had seen something in Robert Eugene's eyes that terrified her, a connection between the boy and the doll that she believed was dangerous. "You've let the spirit in the maid," had said with trembling hands, her voice shaky. "And now it will never leave." The family, desperate and afraid, tried to get rid of the doll. They locked it away in the attic, thinking that would end its influence, but it only grew worse. Robert Eugene's behavior became more erratic, and the hauntings intensified. Doors would bang, furniture would be overturned, and the voice of the doll would whisper through the house, calling the boy's name. One night, the family fled the house, leaving everything behind, including Robert the doll. But the doll was not abandoned for long. The house was sold to a new family, unaware of the horror that lay within. And when the new occupants arrived, they too began to experience the same disturbances, the same unexplainable events. Robert, now abandoned in the attic for years, had once again found its victim. And that, perhaps, is the real horror of Robert the doll. It's not the ghost that haunts the house or the voices in the dark. It's the knowledge that it never truly leaves. It is passed from one owner to the next, the darkness feeding off the fear it instills in its victims. Robert the doll has always been waiting patiently, watching the house from the shadows, waiting for the next family to fall under its curse. The question is, how long will it be until someone else picks it up? The Otto house, once a peaceful, quiet home, now stood as a place of whispered legends and chilling memories. Robert the doll, however, was far from forgotten. It was a relic, an artifact that had survived the tests of time and fear, its eerie influence lingering long after its original owners had fled. It wasn't just a doll, it was a curse bound to the house and to those unlucky enough to cross its path. As the years passed, the house changed hands several times, but each new occupant seemed to experience the same disturbing events, the same inexplicable whispers and movement in the night. Most families couldn't handle the strange happenings, the feeling of being watched, the sense that something invisible was always just behind them. Some left hastily, some with their sanity frayed, but none dared to stay long enough to unravel the full mystery of the house's haunted past. Then came the new owners, the Mulligans. They were an ambitious couple drawn to the house for its old-world charm and the grand space it offered for their growing family. They had heard the rumors about the doll. Of course, everyone in Key West knew about Robert, but they dismissed them as little more than local folklore, the type of tale passed down for generations to spice up the history of the town. They believed they could handle anything. At first, things were normal. They moved in, made the house their own, and filled the rooms with their children's laughter. The attic, with its dust-covered boxes and forgotten relics, became a storage space for their holiday decorations, old furniture, and things they didn't need. That was where they found him. At the back of the attic, hidden beneath a heavy cloth, sat Robert the doll. When the family discovered the doll, it was nothing more than a curiosity. The Mulligans had heard the rumors, of course, but they didn't believe in ghosts or curses. They thought it was just a simple, albeit strange part of the house's history. Robert the doll was placed on a shelf in the attic, almost as an afterthought to gather dust along with the rest of the forgotten treasures. But then strange things began to happen. It started slowly, like a whisper at the edge of their perception. The children, two young boys, Timmy and Jake, would occasionally speak of the doll as if it were a person. At first, it seemed innocent enough. They would talk to him, ask him questions, as any child might with a new toy. But over time, their behavior became more concerning. They began to blame the doll for things that went wrong around the house. One day, after a broken vase was found in the living room, Timmy stood in the center of the room, pointing at Robert on the shelf. "It wasn't me," he said, his voice calm, but oddly firm. "Robert did it." The Mulligans laughed it off as typical childhood imagination, a way for the boys to deflect blame. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the boys' stories grew more vivid. They would describe how Robert had moved on his own, how they would wake in the middle of the night to find him sitting in a different chair staring at them with his wide, vacant eyes. One evening, after a particularly unsettling series of noises in the house, scraping sounds, thumps, and whispers, the Mulligans decided to investigate. Timmy and Jake were already in bed, but the atmosphere in the house felt wrong, as if something had shifted. It wasn't just the strange occurrences, it was the sensation that something was watching them. "Do you feel that?" Mary Mulligan whispered, her voice tremulous as she looked around the darkened hallway. "I do," said her husband Daniel, his gaze fixed on the hallway, his body stiff. "It's like the air is thick in here, like something is waiting." The house was quiet, too quiet, but the weight of the atmosphere seemed to press down on them. They looked toward the attic, the place where Robert had been stored. There was something in the way the shadows in the corners seemed to shift. The very space felt alive. "Let's go up," Daniel said, his voice a little shaky. The stairs creaked under their feet as they made their way up to the attic, the silence of the house growing thicker with each step. When they reached the top, the attic door was slightly ajar, as if something or someone had been there recently. It felt wrong, unnatural. Timmy's small voice broke the silence. "Mom, Dad, don't let him get you." Both Daniel and Mary froze. "Don't let him get you." The voice had come from the corner of the attic, but when they turned, there was nothing. Only the dim glow from a single hanging bulb illuminating the piles of boxes and old furniture. At the center of the room, Robert sat there on the shelf, staring at them with those glassy eyes. "He's been waiting for you." Timmy's voice echoed again, sounding distant, as though it were coming from somewhere far away. Mary shivered and turned to Daniel. "What do we do?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," Daniel said, his voice barely audible. "I don't know." Suddenly, the temperature in the attic dropped, a chill creeping into their bones. They could feel the air turning heavier, thicker. The shadows seemed to move, inching toward them, the silence broken only by the soft creak of the floorboards beneath their feet. The feeling of being watched, being hunted, became overwhelming. Robert the doll, sitting so innocuously on the shelf, now seemed to be alive in a way that made their skin crawl. As Mary turned to look at Daniel, she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, but something more terrifying. He had seen it too. The way Robert's eyes seemed to follow their movements, the way the air around them had grown colder, more suffocating. "We need to get out of here," Mary said, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded, stepping toward the door. But just as he reached for the handle, The attic door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound was so violent, so sudden, that both of them jumped back, their hearts pounding in their chests. What the hell was that? Daniel gasped, his breath shallow. We're not alone, Mary whispered, her voice trembling. We're not alone. Behind them, the doll's eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. It wasn't the reflection of the light from the bulb. No, it was something else, something alive. And in that moment, they knew the truth. The house, this cursed place, had never let them go. The evil, the force, the thing that had once been bound to Robert Eugene, had only been waiting. It had been waiting for them to return, waiting for a new family to claim. And now they had finally come face to face with it. The attic door slammed shut with a violent force, sending a wave of panic through Daniel and Mary. The cold that swept through the room was suffocating, almost oppressive, as though the very air had been thickened by the presence of something malevolent. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and move alive with dark intent. It wasn't just the house. It was the doll. Robert had somehow come to embody the evil that lingered here, and it had never truly left. Mary's eyes darted to the corners of the attic, but there was nowhere to hide. The walls, which once felt like a safe, familiar space, now pressed in on her, closing off any chance of escape. Her pulse raced in her ears as she tried the door handle, but it refused to budge. The old wooden door groaned under her touch, as if the house itself were mocking her attempts to leave. She turned to Daniel, panic rising in her chest. "Daniel, we need to get out of here," she urged, her voice shaking. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the doll. Robert was still sitting on the shelf, but now the porcelain face seemed to be almost alive, its expression now more than just a featureless mask. There was a presence, a sinister, unseen force emanating from it. Its smile twisted just slightly, as though it were aware of the terror it had caused, enjoying every moment of it. "It's not just a doll," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. He shook his head in disbelief, his words barely audible. "It's alive. I can feel it." Mary's heart pounded as she turned to look at the doll again. It hadn't moved, but she could feel its eyes on her. No matter where she turned, she felt it always watching. The house had done this. The house had changed. Robert bound him to its evil. But now it was something worse. It was no longer just a doll. It was a vessel for the evil that lingered here, an object of torment for anyone who dared cross its path. "No, no, no," Mary whispered to herself, the words coming out more like a prayer than anything else. She stepped back toward the door again, her mind racing for a way out. There has to be a way, please. But as she moved toward the door, something changed. The air grew thicker. The shadows, once harmless, began to pulse like they were breathing. The sound of soft footsteps echoed in the distance, footsteps that didn't belong to anyone in the room. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't imagining it. The sound was getting closer. Mary's heart skipped a beat. "Daniel, do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Daniel was still staring at the doll, his hands trembling at his sides. "I hear it," he said, his voice tight with fear. "We're not alone. We never were." The footsteps continued, drawing nearer. Mary's body tensed as she took a step back, her eyes darting around the room, desperate to find a way out. The corners of the attic seemed to close in on them. The light from the single bulb flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. It was as if the room itself was breathing alive with malevolent energy. Then the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. There was something else in the air now, something that wasn't just a lingering presence, but a force. a force that had awakened with their return. It was no longer about the doll. It was about the house that had been waiting, the house that had lured them back. A cold wind swept through the room, making Mary's skin crawl. The faint whisper of something too soft to understand filled the air, but there was no one else there. Only the two of them trapped in this oppressive space. The doll remained still, but it was no longer a passive object. It was alive. It was waiting. A low, guttural voice broke the silence, emerging from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was a voice that was both human and not a voice that sent chills down Mary's spine. "You shouldn't have come back," it rasped. Mary's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't coming from the doll, but from somewhere else, somewhere deeper, a presence that had been there all along. The voice seemed to seep from the walls, the floors, the very foundation of the house. Mary stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. What is this?" Her voice was trembling, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The voice answered with a low, mocking chuckle. "You've awakened it. The doll was just the beginning. You should have never returned." Daniel moved beside Mary, his hand reaching for hers. He was shaking, but his grip on her hand tightened. "It's not just a doll, Mary. This is what the house wanted. This is what it has always been." The footsteps returned, this time much closer, and they were not alone. The shadowy figures in the corners of the attic seemed to grow in size, their forms shifting and twisting just out of focus. It was as if the house itself were alive, stretching its limbs, reaching for them, pulling them into its grasp. Suddenly the doll on the shelf shifted. Its head turned slowly, almost too slowly, as if it were savoring the moment. And then, in a voice that sent a shiver through Mary's entire body, it spoke. "You're mine now." The words were chilling, like they were etched into her soul. The house, the doll, the shadows, they were all one. This wasn't just a haunted object. This was a force, something that had been bound to this place for generations. The doll had become a conduit, but now it was more. It was the essence of the house's malevolent power, and it wanted them. It wanted their fear. It wanted their souls. Mary gasped, her hand clutching Daniel's tightly. She could feel the temperature plummet, her breath coming out in short, jagged bursts as the shadows in the room seemed to tighten around them. The walls were closing in. The house was alive. "You're not leaving." The voice hissed again, louder this time, and it sounded as if it were coming from every direction surrounding them. In that moment, the entire house seemed to groan. The floor beneath their feet trembled, as if something enormous was shifting within the walls, the very foundation quaking with the force of the evil within. The walls began to bleed, a trickle of dark liquid running down from the cracks in the plaster, pooling on the floor beneath them. The room felt like it was suffocating them, like the air itself was pressing in, closing off any chance of escape. "We need to get out," Mary whispered, her voice frantic, her eyes darting to the door. But it was too late. The house had already claimed them. The walls of the attic seemed to pulse, the shadows twisting and swirling as if the house itself were alive, aware of their presence. The air was thick and oppressive, the very fabric of reality bending around them, suffocating, tightening. The cold liquid on the floor began to spread, crawling toward them like something sentient, its dark hue reflecting the faint light from the flickering bulb above. The very house felt alive, each creak of the floorboards, each groan of the beams echoing with malice, a warning of what was to come. Mary's heartbeat pounded in her ears as she turned to Daniel, her grip on his hand tightening. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, but his presence was the only thing anchoring her to the world outside the shadows. He was here with her, and for a fleeting moment she thought they might stand a chance. "We can't leave. The voice came again, this time, louder, clearer. It was no longer just a whisper, but a command, a sinister decree. The house was speaking to them. Robert was speaking to them. And they were no longer the masters of their own fate. The footsteps returned, but they were not the echoing sounds of distant movements anymore. They were real, closing in on them, unmistakable. Shadows in the shape of human figures appeared in the corners, shifting with unnatural speed. There were no faces, only voids filled with darkness, and yet the weight of their presence was overwhelming. You are not leaving here. Not this time, the voice hissed again, and this time it was accompanied by a sharp, low laugh, one that reverberated through the house, making the walls vibrate in response. "Stop!" Mary cried out, her voice a mix of defiance and fear, her words swallowed by the overwhelming presence of the house. "You can't have us." The doll. Robert sat on its perch, its eyes unblinking now, glowing in the dim light. Its face, though frozen in a permanent expression, seemed to move. The edges of its smile pulled upwards, stretching wider, as if mocking them, relishing the terror that filled the room. The darkness around them grew thicker, suffocating the air in an unnatural way. "I have always had you," the voice whispered back, the words curling around them like tendrils of smoke. "And I will always have you. You can never escape me. You belong to me." The room seemed to close in on them, the shadows creeping forward, wrapping around their ankles like hands pulling them deeper into the darkness. The floor beneath them creaked, the walls groaned with the weight of the evil inside. It wasn't just the doll. The house itself was a manifestation of this dark force, its soul intertwined with Robert, the thing that had once claimed Robert Eugene Otto. And now it was reaching out for them, pulling them into the depths of its nightmare. Mary turned quickly to Daniel, her panic rising. "We have to get out. There has to be a way." Daniel's eyes locked onto her, and for the briefest moment, she saw a flicker of the man she had married, the man who had always been her protector, her anchor. But now, he was just as lost as she was, just as consumed by the house, the entity that had bound them all. His eyes shifted, and the emptiness returned. "I don't know if we can," he said quietly. His voice, hollow, resigned. "It's too strong. We never should have come back. We never should have touched it." Mary shook her head, fighting the wave of despair that threatened to overtake her. No, they could fight this. They had to. She stepped back, her eyes searching for any way out, any escape. But the door, the only way out, was now sealed shut, invisible to her, as if the house had swallowed it whole. The attic felt as if it was shrinking, the walls pressing inward, the air thick and unbearable. A sharp, sudden screech sounded from behind them. Mary whipped around in time to see the doll move again, this time, not on its perch, but on the ground, crawling toward them with unnatural speed. Its lifeless eyes locked onto them, its porcelain body scraping along the floor like an insect. The laugh returned louder now, filling every corner of the room. "You can't escape me." It crooned, its voice no longer human, but something deep, guttural, and far more sinister. The doll's voice was a twisted mockery of Robert Eugene's innocence. "You are mine now, forever." The figure of the doll was no longer just a simple toy. It was alive, its form shifting and twisting as it moved, its joints creaking with a bone-chilling sound. Mary's breath quickened. It was as if the house itself had merged with the doll, with Robert, and now it was coming for them all. Suddenly, a loud crash filled the room. Something fell from the shelves in the corner, but before Mary could react, the floor beneath her gave way. A part of the wood splintered, and before she could catch herself, she stumbled into the dark hole that had appeared beneath her feet. With a scream, Mary reached for Daniel, but he too was pulled forward, as if an invisible force was dragging them into the abyss of the house. She reached out her hand, desperate to hold on to him, but the shadows seemed to wrap around them, both pulling them deeper and deeper into the darkness. The cold, suffocating air seemed to press in on all sides, and then as the darkness enveloped them completely, a voice echoed through the abyss. "You belong to me now." The darkness, all-encompassing and eternal, swallowed their screams. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The darkness engulfed them, suffocating and thick. Mary couldn't see, couldn't breathe, but the sensation of falling, plummeting, spiraling downward was undeniable. The sound of her heart pounding in her chest was the only thing she could hear thudding loudly in the emptiness. Her fingers gripped the air, but there was nothing to hold on to. Her mind raced. What had happened? Where were they? She could still feel Daniel's presence beside her, his hand outstretched, as though reaching for her through the endless dark. But before she could even attempt to call out to him, the pressure around them grew more intense, like the very air was pressing down on them, crushing them with a force they couldn't escape. Her mind flashed back to the attic, Robert the doll, moving its eyes, glowing, its voice twisting in a guttural chant that made her skin crawl. They had been pulled into something that wasn't just the house anymore. It was alive. The force had always been there waiting, and now it was swallowing them whole. Then the pressure eased. A faint light flickered at the edge of her vision, as though a distant star was peeking through the blackness. She blinked, trying to focus, but the light began to grow, pulling her toward it. She reached out her fingers, brushing against the strange cold surface, and as they made contact, the space around her suddenly shifted. The darkness melted away like mist, leaving her in a space that felt unfamiliar, yet oddly familiar at the same time. The light, now blinding, settled into a dim glow, revealing the outline of a room that looked eerily like the attic. But this was no ordinary room. The walls were covered in strange symbols glowing faintly with a pale, sickly light. The air felt thick with the stench of decay, as though this place hadn't seen the light of day in centuries. The floor beneath her feet was cracked, the boards warped and bowed as if they were alive, breathing. Mary's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the attic. This was something else. The feeling of being trapped returned with full force. The walls were closing in on her again, but this time the air was not only thick with dread, it was alive. She could almost feel it pulsing around her, alive with malevolent intent. And then she heard it again, a whisper, a familiar voice. "You should never have come back." Mary spun around, her breath catching in her throat. There, in the center of the room, stood a figure shrouded in shadows, yet its form was unmistakable. It was Robert the doll. But now it wasn't a doll anymore. It had grown twisted, its face stretched and contorted into something grotesque, its eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. The thing that had once been a simple child's toy was now something far more horrifying, a manifestation of the house's evil, of the malevolent force that had haunted this place for generations. Its smile, once stitched into its porcelain face, had widened unnaturally, and its eyes glistened with cruel delight. "You cannot escape me, Mary." The thing crooned, its voice no longer the childlike tone of Robert Eugene, but something far darker, more sinister. It reached out its fingers, elongated and twitching with a life of their own. "I have waited so long for you to return." Mary staggered backward, her heart hammering in her chest. "No," she gasped, shaking her head. "No, this can't be happening. You're not real." But the figure didn't answer. Instead, it reached forward, its grotesque form closing the distance between them with an unnatural, jerking movement. Mary's feet felt like they were glued to the floor, her body frozen, unable to move. The figure's presence was suffocating its very being, radiating an unholy power. "You belong to me." It hissed, its smile stretching wider with each word. The walls seemed to pulse in response, like they were alive with the doll's energy, with the energy of the house itself. "I will take you, and nothing can stop it." Mary's mind raced, her eyes darting to the edges of the room. She could feel Daniel's presence somewhere distant, as though the space between them had been stretched beyond reason. She called out for him, her voice hoarse with fear. "Daniel!" She screamed the word, echoing through the room, but it was swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. There was no answer. The space around her seemed to ripple with tension, the walls narrowing in on her, and the darkness, the evil, was pulling her closer. Her hands trembled, but she reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small charm she had carried with her for years, one of the only things she had left from her grandmother. It was a small, worn piece of jade, shaped like a crescent moon. Her grandmother had always told her it would protect her from dark things, from forces she couldn't comprehend. Mary held the charm tightly in her palm and pressed it to her chest, her lips trembling as she whispered a prayer under her breath. "Please, please, help me." The figure's movements stopped. The room seemed to pause, like everything was holding its breath. The doll thing tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You think that will save you?" It sneered. But just as it stepped forward, the charm in Mary's hand began to hum the vibration, like a soft pulse growing stronger. The air around her seemed to shift, and the shadows that had been closing in began to recoil. The walls groaned, their pulsating rhythm faltering. Mary didn't stop. She gripped the charm harder, whispering words she didn't fully understand, the language of her grandmother, ancient and forgotten, rising from deep within her. The doll thing shrieked its form, distorting, twisting, as if it were being pulled apart by an unseen force. The shadows shrank back, the walls cracking with the sound of something breaking, something old, something powerful unraveling before her. "No," the figure hissed, its voice splitting with agony. "You cannot banish me. I will always be here. You cannot escape me." But it was too late. The light from the charm flared brightly, and in an instant, the room seemed to fracture, the very fabric of reality cracking like glass. The shadows recoiled. The figure screamed one last time, and then, with a deafening roar, it was gone. Silence. The oppressive weight in the room lifted. The walls stopped pulsing, the air cleared, and for the first time, Mary felt free. The house, the thing, was gone. The doll's malevolent influence was broken. She had faced it, and she had won. Her hands shook as she looked down at the charm, now glowing faintly in her hand. She clutched it tightly, knowing she had done what needed to be done. She had broken the curse, but as the shadows began to dissipate and the house finally exhaled its last breath, Mary knew one thing for sure. The evil of Robert the doll had been defeated, but the house itself, its memory would linger. It would always be part of them, and they would never forget the terror that had lived there, waiting patiently for its next victim. "Daniel," Mary whispered, her voice trembling, but there was no response. She turned around, heart-pounding eyes searching the space where he had been, but there was no one there. The house had taken him too. The room around Mary blurred as her vision clouded with panic. The air, once thick and suffocating with the presence of the malevolent force, now felt eerily still, like the calm after a violent storm. Her heartbeat hammered in her chest, the sharp sound of her pulse drowning out the quiet around her. She reached for the spot where Daniel had stood only moments before, but it was empty. His presence had vanished as suddenly as the house's grip. "Daniel." Her voice cracked, weak and desperate. as she spun in place, her eyes darting across the empty room. The shadows had receded, leaving the space dim, almost peaceful. Yet the unease remained a gnawing feeling that clung to her skin like a chill. He couldn't be gone. He couldn't. They had fought together. They had faced it together. There was no way the house could have taken him, not after everything they had just endured. But as Mary called out again, her voice trembling, she knew. He was gone. The house the thing had taken him. The light from the charm flickered in her hand, and she squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force back the tears that burned behind her eyelids. The overwhelming weight of grief settled heavily on her chest, but she couldn't allow herself to break. Not yet. Not when she still had a chance to end this once and for all. She wasn't alone. She steadied herself, her breath shaky but determined, and moved forward. The room, once a prison of shadows, seemed to open up in front of her, its oppressive weight now a distant memory. Yet that presence was still there, lurking, waiting. As she moved toward the attic door, she felt a sharp pang in her chest, the hollow ache of losing Daniel. It was as if the house had pulled him into itself, swallowed him whole, just as it had tried to do with her and her family for so long. She gripped the charm tighter, feeling its warmth pulse against her skin. She needed to find him. She had to. The air around her began to change again. A slight hum in the walls, an energy she could feel prickling the back of her neck. It was like the house was alive again, its heartbeat resonating in the foundation beneath her feet. But this time, it wasn't going to stop her. She reached the door, the old wooden frame creaking as if protesting her touch. But Mary didn't hesitate. She threw it open and stepped into the narrow hallway that stretched out before her, leading toward the stairs that descended into the rest of the house. Every footstep seemed to echo louder than the last, each one pulling her deeper into the heart of the house that was now feeding off her fear, off her grief, off her desire to save her family. The house was still hungry. As she descended the stairs, Mary noticed something odd, something different. The house felt empty. The usual whispering presence of the malevolent force was muted, like the very air had been drained of its oppressive weight. She was no longer walking through the halls of a house. She was walking through something else entirely, something far darker. "Daniel," she called softly, her voice barely more than a breath, but it seemed to reach into the corners of the house. She paused, listening intently, but there was nothing. No reply, no movement, just silence. The kind of silence that dripped with dread, as if the house itself were waiting for her to make a mistake. Suddenly the floorboards creaked. Mary's heart lurched in her chest, and she turned quickly, the air seeming to press in on her from every side. She was no longer alone. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, silhouetted in the dim light from the open door. It was tall, cloaked in shadows, its face hidden beneath a hood. But as it moved closer, Mary could see a faint outline of something that made her stomach churn. It was familiar. "Daniel?" She whispered, hope surging through her, desperate for any sign that he had somehow found a way back. But the figure didn't respond. It continued to move closer, its footsteps soft but purposeful. The room around them seemed to stretch, the shadows warping and twisting with every step the figure took. The darkness was alive again. Mary's fingers tightened around the charm, the jade crescent moon still warm in her palm. But the warmth was fading. She could feel it, just like the last flicker of light in the distance. And then the figure's head turned. Its face was still hidden, but its eyes glowing pierced through the darkness, fixing on her with an intensity that made her stomach turn. The figure didn't speak, but she could hear its voice in her mind, clearer than ever. "You should never have returned." The voice was chilling. It was not Daniel. It was something else entirely. Something darker. The figure's form seemed to shimmer almost like an illusion, flickering between what was real and what was not. "I did return," Mary said, her voice trembling, but filled with a resolve she hadn't realized she still had. She took a step forward. "And I will find Daniel. I'll take him back." The figure's smile widened, though its face remained hidden beneath the shadows. "You can't take him back. He is part of me now." The words hit her like a physical blow. The house had done this. It had taken him, twisted him, made him part of its evil. She couldn't let that happen to him. She wouldn't. Mary moved forward, her footsteps more determined now, though every part of her screamed to turn back. The house wasn't just a place. It was something far more dangerous, a force that had twisted everything it touched. But she was not afraid anymore. "You're wrong," she whispered, barely audible, but the words were heavy with defiance. "You don't control us anymore." She stepped closer, her gaze locked on the figure's glowing eyes. The walls seemed to shrink again, the shadows pressing in around her. But she didn't stop, and then just like that, the figure vanished. Mary froze, her breath caught in her throat. The room was silent again except for the echo of her own heartbeat. Where was Daniel? "Daniel," she called again, her voice shaking but resolute. "Please, answer me." The house had taken him, yes, but she wasn't going to stop fighting. It wasn't over, not yet. The silence that followed was thick, pressing in from all sides. The shadows that had once seemed like mere figments of the house's old decaying structure now felt like tangible things almost alive. Each step Mary took toward the center of the hallway seemed to bring the walls closer, tightening around her like a trap. But she could feel the pulse of the charm in her hand, still warm, still fighting, and that gave her the strength to push forward. "Daniel," she whispered again, her voice a soft thread in the cold, oppressive air. There was no response, but Mary didn't expect one. She had felt the house's grip loosen just slightly, but she knew it was far from over. The darkness that had consumed this place was ancient, far older than anything she could understand. It wasn't something that could be simply banished with a charm or a single confrontation. The walls seemed to sigh their deep groans, carrying through the house as if the house were alive, stretching, shifting. And then the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, barely audible at first. Soft, hesitant, but unmistakably there. Mary's heart skipped a beat. "Daniel," she called a little louder this time, trying to steady her breathing. "Please answer me." The footsteps grew louder, and her heart leaped in her chest. The hallway in front of her, once empty, seemed to stretch on longer, its darkness deepening. A shadow appeared at the far end, just barely visible in the dim light, an outline of a figure too familiar to be a stranger. But it wasn't Daniel. The figure was tall, just like Robert had been shrouded in darkness, its outline shifting unnaturally in the dim glow of the single light. The figure's head tilted slightly to one side, and Mary could feel its gaze on her, even though there were no visible eyes. Her pulse quickened, and dread settled in her stomach like a stone. This presence, this force, was stronger now. It was coming for her again, and it was ready to finish what it had started. She took a step back, her fingers still clutching the charm. The pulse from it was stronger now, throbbing in her hand, sending waves of warmth through her fingertips. But it was not enough. The presence in front of her, no longer a figment of her imagination, was closing in the air, thickening with the weight of it. "You cannot leave," the figure rasped, its voice deep and hollow, like something ancient, something that had long forgotten the meaning of mercy. The sound reverberated off the walls, as if the house itself were speaking through the figure. Mary could barely breathe, but she didn't stop. "I will leave," she said, her voice defiant, despite the terror that gripped her chest. "I will take Daniel with me." But the figure didn't move. Instead, Its lips curled into a wicked smile, wide and unsettling. The shadows around it deepened, and suddenly, the house groaned a low, guttural noise that seemed to shake the foundation itself. The floor beneath her feet rumbled as though something below was stirring. "I've waited so long for you to come." The figure continued, its voice echoing in her mind now, not just in the room. "I've watched you, hoped for you, but you cannot escape me." Mary's throat tightened, the air growing cold. She could hear the faint sound of whispers, now soft, ghostly voices coming from all directions, seeping from the walls, the floor, the very air around her. It was as if the house were alive, feeding on her fear, drawing her into its depths. "No," Mary gasped, shaking her head. "You're wrong. I will find him." The figure's laugh was sharp, slicing through the air like a blade. "You think you can save him. You think you can save yourself. He is mine, just as you are. All of you belong to me. Forever." The shadows closed in tighter, the dark presence pushing against her, pulling her into the depths of its grasp. She could feel herself being drawn closer, the air thick with a suffocating pressure that made her head spin. The house had claimed them all, and it wasn't going to let go so easily. But even in the face of the overwhelming darkness, the memory of her family, her determination to free them, pushed her forward. She wasn't going to let it win. Not again. She would fight until she couldn't fight anymore. "I will find him," she repeated, more to herself than to the thing in front of her. She could feel the strength in her bones, the courage rising up from deep inside her. It wasn't over. Not yet. She could still save Daniel. She had to. The figure tilted its head, and for a moment it seemed almost amused, as though Mary's words were nothing more than a fleeting distraction. But that brief moment of uncertainty was enough. She reached for the charm, once more, her fingers pressing hard against the jade crescent moon. "Please," she whispered, feeling her body tremble. "Please help me." The charm in her hand pulsed with sudden radiant light, a warmth that spread through her chest and out to the tips of her fingers. The shadows around her recoiled, their form flickering in response to the light. The house, too, seemed to shudder, as though it were resisting the energy that now surged through Mary's body. The figure screamed a sound that was both human and inhuman, its voice warping in agony. The shadows quivered as though they were being torn apart by the power of the charm. The house groaned, the floor shaking beneath Mary's feet, as if the very structure of the place was beginning to fall apart. But the darkness fought back. The walls screamed in agony, the floor splintered, and the very air seemed to choke with an overwhelming, suffocating force. The figure lunged toward her, its form disintegrating into the shadows, but it was too late. The charm in her hand flared one last time, blinding in its intensity. The house screamed as it was torn apart by the light, its influence shattering, breaking into pieces, leaving nothing but echoes of its power behind. The figure dissolved into nothingness, its voice fading, the whispers of the house silencing. Mary stood alone, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The room was quiet, too quiet now. She felt the pressure release, the air returning to normal. The oppressive force that had once held her captive, that had tried to pull her into the shadows, was gone. The house was silent, but Mary knew better than to believe it was truly over. The evil might be gone, but the memory of the house and of Robert would always remain. The curse, though broken, had left its mark. It always would, but she had done it. She had faced it. And for the first time in a long time, Mary felt free. Mary stood in the silence of the house, the air around her heavy and still, as if the entire building were holding its breath. The last remnants of the shadowy figures had dissolved, leaving nothing but the faint smell of decay and the thick, lingering tension in the air. Her hand still clutched the charm, now warm and glowing faintly, as though it too were trying to catch its breath after the battle it had just fought. For a moment, everything was calm. The oppressive weight that had once consumed her was gone, and the house felt almost peaceful. But that peace was fragile, like a thin film stretched too tight. Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking, something that wasn't finished with them yet. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of the darkness returning. The shadows seemed to be stretched thin, no longer heavy with the same malevolent energy. But they were still there, watching, waiting. The house had broken, but had it really? Or had it merely retreated into the cracks, biding its time? Daniel, Mary whispered, her voice small, but full of desperate hope. She scanned the room again as if expecting him to materialize out of the shadows. But there was nothing. The house was still. Too still. She felt a sudden coldness in the pit of her stomach, a deep sense of dread that clung to her like a shadow. Where was Daniel? The air around her grew colder, and the silence felt too silent, like the calm before a storm. Her body tensed, the hairs on her neck standing on end, as she listened for any sound, any indication that Daniel was still here somewhere, still alive. "Daniel!" she called out again, louder this time. Her heart thundered in her chest, but no answer came. The house had swallowed him whole, and now it seemed it was waiting for her to make the next move. She took a tentative step forward, her feet echoing on the wooden floor, the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. The house seemed to breathe around her, its walls sighing, as if alive, sensing her every movement. Her fingers tightened around the charm, but the warmth it had given her before seemed to fade. The power was no longer flowing through it the way it had earlier. A distant creak echoed from upstairs, then another. A soft thud. It was a familiar sound, the sound of footsteps. But it couldn't be. Not in this house, not after everything they had just gone through. Mary's breath hitched. She turned eyes wide, seeking the source of the sound. Her pulse quickened and her legs felt weak beneath her, but she forced herself to move toward the stairs. The footsteps were coming from upstairs. A sickening thought wormed its way into her mind. Could it be him? Her feet moved faster now, though each step felt as though she were wading through molasses. The house loomed around her, dark and quiet, but in the corners of her vision, she could see the faintest flickers, movement, shadows that didn't quite belong, as if the house itself were watching her. The staircase creaked beneath her weight, its old wood groaning in protest. But Mary climbed higher, her body trembling with anticipation. She reached the top, her breath shallow, her hand gripping the railing as she turned toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. The footsteps had stopped, but she could feel the weight of them still, as if they were waiting for her to make her next move. As she moved down the hallway, a door creaked open just ahead. Her eyes shot to the open door and a cold chill swept down her spine. "Daniel?" She called out, her voice trembling as she stepped closer, the house around her seeming to close in with each step. The room was dark, its shadows spilling into the hallway, but in the center, illuminated by the faint glow of the moonlight streaming through the window, was Robert the doll. And this time it was not sitting innocently on a shelf. It was standing its back to her, facing the window. The doll's form seemed almost alive, its shape contorting in unnatural ways. The familiar sailor's outfit was still on it, but now it seemed more like a uniform, a prison, as if it had never been meant to be worn by a child. A soft guttural chuckle echoed from the doll, and Mary froze. "I see you," the voice whispered, though it didn't come from the doll's lips. It was as if the voice itself was coming from the walls, from the very air around her. Her blood ran cold. The doll slowly turned its glassy eyes, catching the light as it faced her. The once innocent face of Robert had now twisted into something grotesque, its smile too wide, too knowing. The eyes gleamed with a malevolent hunger, a deep and empty satisfaction. "You think you can defeat me?" It hissed, its voice now layered with an eerie, distorted cadence. "You are mine, all of you. You cannot escape me. Not now. Not ever." Mary staggered backward, her chest tight with fear, but her gaze never left the doll. It was still in that sailor outfit, yet the air around it was now thick with an unnatural force. The house groaned, the walls trembled as if reacting to the doll's presence. "What do you want from us?" Mary whispered, her throat tight with fear. The doll's head tilted slightly, its smile stretching wider. "I want everything, and I will have it. You all belong to me, now and forever." Mary's eyes darted around the room, her body trembling. This wasn't just about Robert anymore. It wasn't just about the doll. It was the house, the entity behind it all. It had been feeding on fear for years, and now it was alive, a force of malevolence that had been waiting for the right moment to claim her, to claim Daniel. With a sharp inhale, Mary stepped back, shaking her head in disbelief. She had fought this, she had won, but now she realized it was not over. The house had not just been a physical place, it was a living thing, and now it wanted them all. The room seemed to grow darker, and the temperature dropped drastically. Mary's breath became visible in front of her, the cold biting at her skin. The doll Robert slowly reached out its arms, the limbs jerking unnaturally, as if the strings controlling it were tugging at every part of its being. "Daniel," Mary breathed, her voice desperate. She couldn't lose him, not like this. "Please come back to me." The doll's eyes gleamed with an unsettling satisfaction as it stood in front of her. "It's too late," it whispered. "You should have never come back. You never should have touched me." The shadows around her deepened, the room warping with the pressure of the evil force that had been waiting, lurking in the corners and the walls, in the very essence of the house. And then with a deafening crash, the floor beneath Mary's feet shattered, sending her plummeting into the abyss below. The floor beneath Mary gave way with a violent jolt, and she fell plummeting, twisting through the dark air. She could hear the crash of breaking wood, the splintering of the foundation, as if the house itself were crumbling, pulling her deeper into its gaping maw. Her body tumbled through the blackness, her breath stolen by the sudden rush of air. Time stretched and warped. For a moment, she couldn't even tell if she was still falling, or if the world around her had become something entirely different. It was as if the house itself had turned into an endless, cavernous pit. The walls twisted, the shadows distorted, and the air was thick with something foul, an oppressive, suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. Then, with a sickening thud, she hit the ground. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, but somehow she managed to remain conscious. Her hands were scraped raw, her body aching with the force of the fall. She lay on the cold, damp floor for a moment, gasping for breath, trying to steady herself to make sense of where she was. The air around her was thick with a familiar heaviness, the same feeling of being watched, of being consumed. Slowly, she pushed herself to her feet, wiping the dirt from her hands, her heart still racing in her chest. She looked around, her eyes adjusting to the dim, flickering light. The room she found herself in was different. It wasn't the attic anymore. It wasn't even the house she remembered. This place was something else. The walls were smooth stone, slick with dampness, and the ceiling stretched high above her, disappearing into the darkness. The air smelled of rot and decay, like something had been left to fester in the shadows for far too long. And then a voice. "You're mine now, Mary." The voice was smooth, cold, too familiar, too twisted. It was Robert's voice, but not Robert's. It was something darker, something far older, something hungrier. The doll's malevolent presence filled the room, suffocating her. Mary turned, her heart sinking, as she spotted the thing she feared the most. Robert the doll stood at the far side of the room, but it wasn't the porcelain child's toy anymore. The doll had grown. Its limbs were no longer stiff, no longer bound by the constraints of its small frame. It had twisted, expanded its face, contorted into something inhuman. The sailor's outfit was shredded, hanging from its form like tattered rags. Its eyes, once glassy and lifeless, now glowed with a malevolent fire, as if something ancient, something dark, had awakened inside the doll. It was no longer a doll. It was a vessel for the house's power. "I told you," the voice said, dripping with malevolence as the thing took a slow step toward her. "You can never escape. You can never outrun me." Mary's breath caught in her throat. Her heart raced, and panic clawed at her chest, but she refused to give in. She had fought too hard, had come too far to lose now. The house had tried to swallow them, to break them, but it wouldn't win. She wouldn't let it. The thing's eyes flickered, a cruel glimmer of satisfaction flashing across its twisted face. "You should have stayed away," it crooned. "You belong to me now. The house and I are one. And now you will be part of us." Mary's pulse hammered in her ears. The air around her seemed to thicken, becoming suffocating, as if the very room were collapsing in on her. The walls closed in slowly, the space becoming smaller, tighter, more oppressive. It was like the house was alive, closing around her in a final crushing embrace. But she wasn't giving up. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the jade crescent moon charm still nestled in her palm. The warmth of it seeped into her fingers, and for a brief moment, she felt the faintest pulse of energy. The charm had been her lifeline before. It had helped her fight. It would help her again. Mary raised the charm, her voice shaky but resolute. "I will not be a part of this. You have no power over me." The doll's grin widened, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch, curling around her like a physical force trying to drag her down. "You think you can stop it?" the voice mocked. "I've been here for so long. So many have tried to fight. But you will fail just like they did." The air around Mary grew colder, the shadows thickening into something tangible. The walls seemed to pulse, as if they were alive, breathing in rhythm with the evil in the room. The floor beneath her feet cracked, splintering, as if the very house was opening its mouth to swallow her whole. But Mary held her ground, her fingers clutching the charm tighter, her voice unwavering as she repeated the words. "I will not be a part of this." The light from the charm flared again, its glow growing brighter, almost blinding in its intensity. For a moment, the darkness seemed to recoil, as if the very presence of the charm was pushing back against the house itself, against the malevolent energy that had claimed it. The doll thing screeched its form, distorting its limbs, jerking, as if trying to break free of the energy that was now flooding the room. The walls groaned, the air thick with a sense of struggle, like something ancient and powerful was fighting to survive. But Mary didn't stop. She couldn't. The house was fighting back, but so was she. The charm in her hand pulsed with power, the energy building, and the walls began to crack, the pressure in the room releasing just slightly. The shadows screeched, as if they were being torn apart by an unseen force, and the figure of Robert the doll wavered its form, losing its solidity. "No!" The voice screamed, the words distorted like they were being sucked into a void. "You cannot stop me." Mary's voice rang out one last time, filled with the strength of everything she had left her will to break free. "I will fight you until the end." With a deafening roar, the house seemed to collapse around her. The walls cracked, splintered, and the shadows writhed, snapping apart like broken chains. the room shattered into nothingness, and with it, the presence of the doll. The house, the curse, was breaking apart, and then there was silence. Mary stood in the rubble, breathing heavily, her body trembling, but the weight that had once crushed her chest was gone. The shadows were no longer there. The walls had crumbled, and the air was still peaceful. The house was silent. It was over, but even as Mary stood there trying to comprehend the victory she had just claimed, the whisper of a final chilling truth slid into her mind. The house might be gone, but its legacy, the darkness it had spread, was still with her. It had shaped her, consumed her, and in some ways it would never truly leave. But she had won. They had all won. Mary closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. And for the first time in so long, she felt the weight of the past begin to lift. She was free. For now, though the house had crumbled around her, the air remained thick with the remnants of its darkness. The house, once so full of life and malevolence, now stood in ruins. Its walls cracked, its windows shattered, the foundations reduced to little more than rubble. But Mary wasn't sure that the battle had truly ended. The silence that followed her victory felt too still, as though something were watching, waiting just beyond her reach. The house may have been broken, but the evil within it had never truly been defeated. She had felt at the house it still lingered. The curse, the malevolent force that had gripped her and her family for so long, hadn't just vanished. Mary's eyes scanned the remnants of the attic, the crumbling walls, the dust settling on broken furniture, and the fragments of the porcelain doll that had caused so much torment. But it was still there. In the corner, a shard of Robert the doll's broken face glinted in the dim light. The eyes, now cracked and misshapen, glimmered eerily. The doll's remains were scattered, but the very sight of them made her stomach turn. Despite everything, it still felt alive. She could feel the pulse of it, the lingering presence that haunted the air. She stepped closer to the doll's remnants, her breath shallow, each footfall heavy with doubt. "It's not over," she whispered, though she didn't know who she was trying to convince herself or the ghostly remnants of the house that still seemed to watch her. As she knelt to pick up a broken piece of Robert's hand, something shifted. The walls groaned again, the house seeming to inhale as if drawing a deep breath from the very core of the earth. Mary froze her hand, still hovering over the doll's remains. The shadows began to stretch, creeping toward her once more. But this time, it wasn't the house that moved. It was something else. A voice, soft but chilling, rose from the darkness. "You thought you could escape me?" Mary's heart skipped a beat. She knew the voice. It was the voice she had heard when she first stepped into the attic, the voice of the thing that had trapped them here, the voice of Robert the doll, now distorted and tainted by something darker. The shadows swirled around her, growing thick, heavy, and familiar. The walls seemed to contract as the malevolent force returned with a vengeance. The light in the room flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls, making the room seem even more oppressive than before. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, her grip tightening around the shard of porcelain. "It's over. It's finally over." But the darkness in the room thickened the shadows, stretching as though they were reaching for her, pulling her back into the nightmare. The temperature dropped again, and the air became saturated with the same fear she had felt when she first entered the house. "You never truly leave me." The voice echoed now, coming from all directions, a chorus of whispers rising from the corners of the room. The doll was only the beginning. "You belong to me." The words twisted around her, squeezing the breath from her lungs. She had broken the house's curse, but this force, this thing, wasn't just bound to the house. It had always been there, lurking in the shadows. And now, it was calling her back into its fold. No. she whispered, her voice shaky but determined. "I won't belong to you. I'll fight you until the end." The shadows shifted again. The dark figure of Robert the doll, or whatever it had become, loomed in the corner. Its face, once childlike and innocent, was now a grotesque mockery of that innocence, twisted and stretched into something monstrous. It was not just a doll. It was a manifestation of all the pain, fear, and torment that the house had caused over the years. But Mary wasn't afraid anymore. She stepped forward, the shard of porcelain still in her hand, holding it like a weapon. "You won't win," she said, her voice stronger now. "You never will. You can't control me. You can't control us." The figure of the doll didn't respond immediately. Instead, it took a step forward, its form shifting in and out of the shadows. "You are weak. Your spirit is broken. You can't escape what you've become." The house seemed to grow even darker, the walls vibrating with the presence of something terrible. Mary could feel the house's grip tightening around her once more. But she didn't falter. The light from the charm she still held flickered, but it was enough. It was always enough. "You think you can still control me?" she spat, holding the charm in her other hand. The light flared brighter, more intense now, growing with the strength of her defiance. "I will destroy you." The doll's twisted grin stretched wider, its mouth opening in a silent scream as the shadows around it began to pulse in rhythm with Mary's resolve. She could feel the air thickening with energy, an oppressive force that threatened to drown her, but she fought back. She had to, and in that moment, something shifted. The walls groaned once again, but this time it wasn't just the house. It was the curse, the entity that had haunted this place for so long. It was starting to break apart. With a final forceful cry, Mary held the charm in front of her, her will surging with power she didn't know she had. The house trembled, the air crackling with energy, the shadows recoiling in fear. The doll, the thing that had controlled this place, that had tried to consume her and her family, began to dissolve. The figure that had once towered in the room shattered into pieces, the shadows scattering as if they could no longer hold its form together. The darkness screamed, loud, piercing, and full of rage, but it was fading. The presence that had once seemed omnipotent was crumbling, unraveling before her eyes. Mary's chest heaved with each breath, her body still shaking with the effort, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop, and then just like that, the figure of Robert was gone. The shadows faded into nothing, and the room was still. No longer thick with the oppressive force of the curse, the space felt empty, in the most profound sense of the word. The house, the doll, the evil, it was no more. The house groaned one final time, and the air cleared. The room, which had once felt suffocating and alive with malevolent energy, was now still silent. But the silence wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of fear. It was the peaceful, exhausted silence of a battle finally over. Mary stood in the center of the room, her breath ragged but steady. Her hands were still trembling, but she felt the weight of the curse finally lifting from her. She had won. She had freed herself. And she had freed Daniel, wherever he was, from the evil that had held them both captive for so long. But even as the house crumbled around her, as the remnants of Robert the doll were scattered into nothingness, Mary knew that some darkness could never be fully erased. It would linger like a scar on the soul, always remembered, always a part of her. But for now she was free. The house was silent. The air, once thick with malice, now felt strangely calm, almost serene. But Mary could still feel the echo of the darkness lingering in the corners of the room. It was faint now, like the last vestiges of a storm clearing after a long, violent night. The battle was over. The doll was gone. But something deep inside her stirred. It wasn't relief. It was an unsettling awareness. The house had been broken, yes, but the evil had seeped into the very foundation of her being. She took a step back, feeling the weight of the room shift around her. The walls, which had once groaned under the weight of the curse, were now eerily still. The house itself felt empty. But that emptiness wasn't comforting. It was unsettling, as though it had been hollowed out its very soul, extracted, leaving nothing but the remnants of the darkness that had once thrived here. Mary's hand shook as she clutched the charm, still warm from the energy she had used to break the curse. It had saved her, but now she wasn't so sure. The charm's glow had faded, the light no longer bright enough to illuminate the room. It was as if its power had been exhausted, drained along with the house's oppressive grip. She had won, but at what cost? She turned and walked through the remnants of the attic, stepping over the broken pieces of furniture and debris that littered the floor. The window was cracked, the faint light of the moon casting long shadows on the ground. But it wasn't the comforting glow it used to be. It was cold, distant, like the room itself had lost its warmth. Mary's feet carried her instinctively toward the staircase. The house was still, but she could feel the absence of something, the absence of the energy that had once filled it. It wasn't just the house that had changed. She had too. She could feel it deep inside, like the last breath of the house had seeped into her, becoming a part of her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face it, but she knew she had to. She had to find Daniel. She took one last look around the attic, her eyes falling on the broken pieces of Robert. His remains were scattered across the floor, his face a grotesque mockery of innocence. The thing that had once been him was gone. The house had consumed him. But was he truly gone, or was it just another trick, another attempt to make her think it was over? No, she whispered to herself, shaking her head. It's over. She ascended the stairs quickly, almost as if the house might swallow her whole if she didn't hurry. But when she reached the top, her heart skipped a beat. The hallway stretched out before her, but something was wrong. The walls, the very air felt thicker now, as if they were closing in on her. She could hear the faint sound of whispering again, but it wasn't the malevolent whisper she had heard before. It was softer now, more pleading, more like a lullaby, a mournful tune, one that seemed to pull at her soul. Her breath caught in her throat as she moved down the hallway, her eyes fixed on the distant door. It was slightly ajar, just enough for a sliver of light to seep through. But it wasn't the warmth of the daylight that filtered in through the cracks. It was the harsh, cold glow of something else, something that chilled her to her very core. Daniel. Her voice was small, trembling as she called out his name. She pushed open the door, the creak of the hinges sounding too loud in the silence that surrounded her. The room was dim, the air heavy with the same oppressive force she had felt throughout the house, but it was more intense now, as though it was waiting for her. The sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. Daniel was standing in the center of the room, his back turned to her. He was facing the wall, staring at something she couldn't see. His body was stiff, unmoving. His shoulders hunched in a way that made him look smaller, as if the weight of the house had taken the last remnants of his spirit. Daniel Mary's voice was barely a whisper, but she felt the words claw their way out of her throat. Please, come back to me. There was no response. Her heartbeat quickened as she stepped toward him. As she moved closer, the shadows around her seemed to shift to pulse with an energy she couldn't explain. The air felt thicker, the room smaller. She couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on her. Daniel, she repeated, her voice firmer now. Look at me, please. And then, as if pulled by an invisible force, Daniel slowly turned around. His eyes, Mary's breath caught in her throat. His eyes were empty, hollow. His once warm brown eyes now seemed like glass, vacant and lifeless. There was no recognition in them, no trace of the man she had known. It was as if he was gone. But as Mary's heart began to crack, she noticed something else. The air around Daniel was dark, like a cloud swirling around him, swirling into the shape of something familiar. The presence, the thing. It wasn't just Robert anymore. The thing had taken Daniel. It had consumed him, just like it had consumed the house, like it had consumed everyone who had stepped into its grasp. Mary staggered back, a cold shiver running down her spine. The shadows around Daniel began to deepen, growing larger, more menacing, as though the darkness itself was alive, pulling him into its depths. "No!" Mary gasped the word barely escaping her lips. "No, no, no!" "Daniel, please." The darkness seemed to close in on him, like a vortex swallowing him whole. The room around her was no longer just a room. It was part of the house's soul, a place that had been twisted by centuries of malevolent energy. And now it had taken everything she had loved. The floor beneath her began to crack the walls, shuddering with a low, mournful rumble. The house, the entity that had fed off their fear, was not finished with her. It was never finished. Daniel's body trembled violently, and the darkness pulled at him, twisting his form as if he were being sucked into the very heart of the house. His eyes met hers finally, and for a brief moment she saw him. The man she loved, the man she had fought for. "Mary!" His voice was faint, weak, barely more than a whisper. But it was him. It was him. And then, just as quickly as the moment had come, it was gone. Daniel's eyes went blank again, his body now completely enveloped by the darkness. The presence swallowed him whole, and Mary was left standing in the middle of the room, helpless, broken. "No!" She whispered, her voice trembling, a choked sob escaping her throat. The house had claimed him. The house had taken everything. The air in the room turned cold, so frigid that Mary could see her breath in the dim light. She stood frozen in place, her eyes fixed on the spot where Daniel had once stood. The emptiness left in his wake was overwhelming, like a vacuum had sucked the life out of the very space around her. The shadows, once merely flickering in the corners of the room, now seemed to have taken full control, crawling up the walls, stretching toward her with slow, deliberate movements. She felt it, the oppressive weight of the house's evil, tightening around her chest, pushing down, suffocating her. The walls seemed to shift, groan, and vibrate, as if the very structure of the house was alive, reacting to the death of the man she loved. She could feel it now, the house's power, a deep gnawing hunger pulling at her from the inside out. The thing, the presence, had consumed Daniel, but it wasn't done yet. It wanted her, too. It wanted them all. She stumbled back, her legs shaking beneath her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, but her feet felt like they were cemented to the ground. The darkness in the room seemed to grow thicker, pulsating with malevolent energy. She could almost hear the house whispering to her, urging her to surrender, to give in to the shadows, to become part of the thing that had waited for so long. But she couldn't. She couldn't give in. Not when she had come so far. "Daniel!" She cried out, her voice echoing through the empty space. But there was no answer. The shadows were silent now, as if the house had swallowed him whole, leaving nothing but an echo of the man she had known and loved. Her breath came in shallow gasps, panic clawing at her chest. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls leaning closer, the shadows thickening until they almost seemed to swallow her whole. She turned to the doorway, desperate to escape, but the path was blocked. The door had vanished, leaving nothing but an endless stretch of darkened hallway that seemed to extend into eternity. The presence was everywhere, now filling every corner, suffocating her. The air itself felt wrong, tainted. The house, once just a place, now felt like a living, breathing entity, its heartbeat pounding in the floorboards beneath her feet. "You can't escape me." The voice came again this time, louder, sharper, cutting through her like a knife. It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was an entity, a presence in the very air, curling around her, tightening its grip. "You belong to me now. You will never leave." The floor beneath her feet seemed to ripple with dark energy, and she could feel the ground shifting, the foundation of the house groaning under the pressure. The walls pulsed, the air grew heavier, and for a moment, she thought she might suffocate right there in the middle of the room. The darkness seemed to creep closer, coiling around her limbs, pulling her into its depths. Her knees buckled and she fell to the floor, her body trembling as she struggled to breathe. The house was trying to consume her just as it had consumed Daniel. It wanted to take her, to twist her into one of the shadows that now filled the room. But in that moment, something inside her snapped. A fire. A small spark of defiance flared to life deep within her. The presence, the shadows, they had taken so much. They had taken Daniel, her family, her very soul. But they would not take her. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "You won't have me." The charm in her hand flared, glowing brightly for the first time in hours, its warmth spreading through her like a wave of light. The shadows around her recoiled, as if repelled by the sudden burst of power. Mary clutched it tightly, her fingers pressing into the jade crescent moon. The light grew brighter, more intense, flooding the room with its brilliance, pushing back against the suffocating darkness that had consumed the house. The walls groaned again, but this time it was different. This time the house was fighting. "I will fight you," Mary said, her voice stronger now, filled with the same defiance that had carried her through everything so far. "I will never belong to you." The darkness screamed in fury, its voice rising in pitch, but the charm's light only grew brighter, forcing it back. The air in the room began to shift, the cold receding. As the warmth from the charm spread, Mary's breath steadied as the pressure around her chest lightened, but the shadows weren't retreating easily. They lashed out at her, seeking to pull her back into their depths. "You cannot destroy me!" The voice growled, its tone dripping with anger. "You cannot break me." "I already have," Mary replied, her words steady, unwavering. "You are nothing without the fear you feed on, and I will not fear you." With that, she raised the charm higher, the light blinding in its intensity. The shadows writhed, their forms contorting, but they were shrinking now, retreating from the light, like a beast driven back into the dark. The very air around her began to crackle with energy, the house itself trembling as if it were being torn apart from within. The walls buckled, the floor splintered, and the very foundation of the house seemed to shudder under the weight of the house's collapse. But through it all, Mary stood tall, unwavering. She would not fall. She would not let it take her. The light from the charm surged one last time, flooding the room, and with a final deafening scream, the shadows disappeared. The presence, the evil that had haunted the house for so long, was gone. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the house's grip. It was the calm of freedom, the calm of an evil finally defeated. Mary stood in the center of the room, her body still trembling, but her heart filled with a quiet victory. The charm in her hand flickered once more, before dimming the jade crescent moon, now merely a relic of the battle she had won. The house, now broken, seemed to groan in one final exhale before the air went still. There were no more whispers, no more shadows, no more fear, and for the first time in a long time, Mary could breathe. But even as the silence settled, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. She had faced the house's curse. She had faced Robert the doll, and she had won. But the shadows had touched her in ways she couldn't fully understand, and the memory of what had happened would never leave her. She had won, but the house, its history, its legacy, would stay with her forever. Mary turned away from the remnants of the doll, her heart heavy with both grief and relief. She had come here to find Daniel, to break the curse. And now the house was no longer the evil it had once been. But the truth remained. Some evils could never truly be destroyed. They could only be contained. She took one last look at the wreckage of the house, then turned toward the door. The night was quiet, the stars above shining brightly. The house might have been broken, but its legacy would live on, not just in the walls, but in the hearts of those who had survived it. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, she knew one thing: she would carry the memory of Robert the doll with her. But it would never control her again. The battle was over. For now, the night air outside was cool, and as Mary stepped away from the ruined house, she could feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing on her shoulders. The house was silent behind her, its haunting presence now a distant memory, yet she could still feel its pulse in the pit of her stomach. The house had taken so much from her, had twisted her and her family in ways she couldn't even begin to comprehend. But now, as she stood under the clear sky, the stars above twinkling softly, she knew she was free. She had broken the curse. She had won, or had she? As Mary made her way away from the house, the road ahead felt oddly empty. The oppressive presence that had once filled the air was gone, but something lingered, a feeling that gnawed at her insides. Her breath quickened the peace she had fought for, suddenly seeming fragile, as though it might shatter at any moment. She felt the weight of the charm still clutched tightly in her hand. The jade crescent moon had once glowed so brightly, but now it was dim, like it had lost its power in the battle. She had used every ounce of it to push the darkness back, to drive the malevolent force away. But what if it wasn't over? She stopped walking and looked back, her feet frozen in place. The house loomed behind her, its structure broken, but still standing a silhouette against the dark night sky. There was something wrong with it, something that she couldn't quite put her finger on. She thought she saw a shadow in one of the windows, just a fleeting movement. But when she blinked, it was gone. Mary took a deep breath, shaking her head. The house was finished. The thing, the curse, it was all over. Wasn't it? Her heart raced, her mind reeling with the uncertainty of what she had just faced. She had defeated the evil within the house. The doll, Robert, had been shattered. But was it truly over, or was something more waiting? The footsteps, those faint, almost imperceptible sounds echoed in her mind again. Were they real? Had the house's curse left its mark on her? Was the evil still lingering in the shadows, ready to find her once more? It can't be. She squeezed the charm tighter, the warmth of it grounding her. Suddenly a voice called to her from the darkness. Mary. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. But there was no one there. She stood alone, the road, stretching out before her, empty and quiet. But the voice had been real. She had heard it. She knew she had. Her pulse quickened, her body tensing as she looked around. Was she imagining things? Or was there something still here? Mary, come back. The voice whispered softer this time, carrying a sense of yearning and pain. Mary's mind raced. She knew that voice. It had been a part of her life for so long, a memory that had haunted her through everything. It was Daniel's voice, but he was gone. The house had taken him. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. She had seen him consumed, felt the darkness take him into its depths, and yet The voice was unmistakable. The very sound of it felt like a pull on her heart. A connection. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For a moment, there was only silence. The wind blew softly, the trees rustling in the distance. But his voice didn't come again. But then she heard it once more. "Come back, it's not over." It wasn't Daniel. It couldn't be. The voice was wrong. It was distorted. But it sounded so real. The shadow in the window, she saw it again. This time it wasn't fleeting. It was there, lingering, moving in the darkness. Something else had returned to the house, something she had failed to destroy. The truth began to sink in, heavy and cold, like a stone in her chest. The evil wasn't gone. It was waiting. It had been waiting for her to think it was over. It had tricked her into thinking the battle had been won. Mary spun on her heels and ran back toward the house, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the distance between her and the ruined structure seeming to grow with each passing second. The weight of the darkness hung heavy in the air, a palpable force pushing her forward, urging her to return. The house loomed ahead, its broken windows dark and hollow, the front door hanging loosely on its hinges. The once creaky door now stood wide open, as though beckoning her inside. "You can't escape me." The voice was now inside her mind, louder than before, wrapping around her thoughts like a tightening coil. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt the familiar sensation of being watched, the sensation of being controlled. The house was still alive. It had never truly left. It had merely bided its time. She couldn't let it win again. She couldn't let it take her, too. Mary stepped over the threshold, the door creaking as it swung open, and she was swallowed by the dark interior of the house once more. The presence surrounded her, pressing in from every side. The shadows moved, undulating alive with malevolent intent. The walls seemed to pulse with a sickening rhythm. And there, at the center of the room, stood Robert the doll, or what had become of him, his form distorted, grotesque, twisted into something far worse than before. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling satisfaction, a smirk stretching across his porcelain face. "I've waited," the voice whispered, now louder, more distinct. "I've waited for you to come back." And there, in the shadow of the doll, stood Daniel, or what was left of him. His form was twisted, hunched, his body moving unnaturally, as though he were no longer fully alive. His eyes, once full of love and light, were now empty black, reflecting nothing but the darkness that had consumed him. Daniel Mary's voice broke a desperate cry escaping her lips. But it wasn't Daniel who answered. The thing that stood before her wasn't the man she had loved. It was a hollow shell, a puppet of the darkness, controlled by the malevolent force that had taken over the house. The thing that had once been Daniel reached out, its hand shaking as it pulled her in. "You belong to me now." And the house, the evil that had never left, began to tighten its grip once more. Mary's breath caught in her throat as Daniel's twisted form reached toward her. Her eyes widened in horror as she took a step back, the weight of the house's evil pressing in around her, suffocating her. The thing that had once been her husband, the man she had fought so hard to save, now stood before her, a hollow, lifeless shell. His once familiar eyes, so full of warmth and love, had turned into black, empty voids. He was no longer the man she had known. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling, but there was no answer. The shadows in the room seemed to grow thicker, swirling around her, as if the house itself were feeding on her grief, on her fear. The presence in the room was suffocating, a force so dark, so oppressive, that it felt like it was pulling her deeper into the house's twisted web. "You cannot fight it," the voice whispered from the shadows, cold and mocking. It seemed to come from everywhere, as if the house itself were speaking, its very walls and floorboards alive with malevolent intent. "You cannot escape what you have become." The words twisted in Mary's chest like a dagger, but she refused to let the house consume her. She had fought too hard. She had faced the darkness head on, and she would do it again, even if it meant losing everything. "No," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "I will not give in." The thing that had once been Daniel took a step toward her, its limbs jerking unnaturally like a marionette being controlled by invisible strings. His face was still empty, but there was something in the way he moved, something familiar, something human. "Mary." The voice came again, this time softer, more desperate. It sounded like Daniel, but distorted like an echo from a world she couldn't reach. The doll, the twisted, monstrous version of Robert, shifted slightly, its face gleaming with a wicked satisfaction. "It's too late for him." It whispered, its voice a low hiss. "And it's too late for you." The shadows in the room closed in, pressing against her skin, like a living thing trying to suffocate her. She felt the familiar pull of fear, the temptation to run, to give in, to leave it all behind. The house was powerful. The thing that had once been Daniel was lost to it, but she could still feel him, the real him, somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the darkness. And that was enough. "No," she whispered again, her voice rising. "I will find him." The house shuddered, its dark presence shaking the very walls. But Mary didn't look away from the figure before her. This was Daniel. He had to be. The love she had for him had to be stronger than whatever evil had taken root in this house. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached out toward him. The shadows recoiled, pulling back from the light of her courage. But still, they lingered, hungry and unforgiving. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice steadier now, her resolve hardening like steel. She reached out and touched his hand, cold and lifeless. For a moment, nothing happened. The shadows seemed to hold their breath, waiting for her to break. But then she felt it. A faint warmth, a pulse, a flicker of life. Her heart raced. She wasn't imagining it. Daniel was still there. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Please come back to me." For a second, his form seemed to falter. The darkness around him pulsed, and for just a moment she saw him, the man she loved, in the flickering light. His face softened, his body relaxing, and his eyes, those deep brown eyes that had always been her anchor, looked at her with confusion, with recognition. But the house, the evil, wasn't ready to let go. The shadows surged forward, swirling violently around her, trying to tear her away, to pull her back into their suffocating grip. The doll, Robert, moved again, its porcelain features contorting with rage. The house was fighting, desperate to keep hold of her, desperate to drag her into its depths, to claim her as its own. But Mary held her ground. She closed her eyes, drawing strength from the light that still flickered in her heart, the light that had never gone out. She had faced worse. She had survived, and she would survive this too. She took a deep breath, focusing on Daniel. On him. "Fight," she whispered, her voice breaking through the chaos. "Fight, Daniel. I'm here. I won't leave you." His eyes flickered again, a glimmer of life returning to them. The darkness recoiled for a moment, as if it had been struck by something stronger than it. Mary reached out again, her hand shaking, but she held on, holding tight to him. And in that instant, something broke. The air around them shifted. The house groaned in protest, its walls shaking, but the force that had once claimed everything began to falter. The presence that had been so overwhelming began to weaken its hold, slipping like a dying ember, losing its strength. The shadows, once thick and suffocating, began to dissipate, retreating back into the corners of the room, away from the light that Mary had summoned with her love and her will. Daniel's form wavered. The house itself seemed to exhale as if releasing a breath it had been holding for centuries. Then, with a final, almost imperceptible shift, Daniel took a step forward. His eyes focused on her, his body still trembling, but there was something in his gaze. Something human. Something alive. "Mary," he whispered, his voice hoarse but clear. "I'm here. I'm with you." The last of the shadows shrieked, retreating as the house groaned once more, its structure shuddering under the strain of the battle between light and dark. The walls cracked, the floor split, but the force that had once consumed them was now unraveling, fading like smoke in the wind, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the house fell silent. The silence stretched on heavy and thick, but this time it was different. It wasn't oppressive, suffocating, or filled with the same malevolent energy that had once consumed everything. Now it was a silence of release, of something finally letting go. The house that had haunted Mary and her family, the evil that had crawled into their lives and twisted them, had finally broken. Mary looked at Daniel, her heart still racing, her pulse hammering in her ears. He stood before her trembling, but there was life in his eyes. He was here. He was back. "Daniel," she whispered again, a single tear sliding down her cheek. She reached out to touch his face, the warmth of his skin bringing her back to the present. "You're alive." Daniel's eyes softened, but the confusion remained. He looked at her, his gaze still searching as if trying to understand the reality of what had happened. "Mary, what happened? Where are we?" His voice was still raw, like he was waking up from a long, dark nightmare. I don't remember." Mary's heart twisted in her chest, and she shook her head, pulling him closer, her arms wrapping around him. "You don't remember?" Her voice was thick with emotion. She swallowed hard, the words catching in her throat. "You were gone, Daniel. The house. I know," Daniel interrupted softly, his hand resting on her shoulder as he gently pulled away, his eyes searching hers. "I can feel it. I don't know what happened. I don't understand." Mary looked at him, her thoughts swirling. He was here, but something felt off. He was physically present, standing before her, but there was a distance, a barrier, something that didn't quite feel right. It wasn't just the way the house had changed him. There was something else, something beneath the surface. "Mary, what's wrong?" Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts, his face filled with concern. You're not scared, are you?" "I'm scared of what's happening to us," she said softly, her voice breaking. "Of what the house has done." His face softened, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "We're free now," he said, his voice steady, though there was still a trace of uncertainty in it. "It's over. The house is gone. We're free." Mary's grip tightened on his hand, but she couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness. The house was gone, but the shadows it had left behind were still there, lingering like smoke in the corners of her mind. She could feel them, the whisper of something unfinished. The house may have been defeated, but the scars it had left behind couldn't simply be wiped away. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, her voice barely audible. "It's not over. It can't be. It's still here." Daniel's eyes widened with concern as he stepped closer, but Mary took a step back, her hand holding the charm tightly in her grip. The jade crescent moon felt warm against her skin, but it was no longer the source of comfort it had once been. It had helped her fight, but now it felt like it was fading, its light dimming. "You're wrong," Daniel said softly, almost pleading. "The house is gone. The curse is broken." But Mary didn't feel the same relief. The light, the shadows, the lingering presence, it all lingered. It was as though the house had only paused retreating for now, but it hadn't been destroyed. Mary turned her gaze back to the remains of the house. The walls had cracked open, the foundation had split, but it was still standing. It was still there, still alive. And then, just as she began to question everything, a new sound, low and hollow, echoed through the broken house. Thud. Mary froze, her heart lurching in her chest. It came again. Thud, thud. The sound was coming from beneath them, deep in the bowels of the house, from the heart of the ruins. "What is that?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with fear. "I don't know." Mary whispered, her eyes darting toward the broken floors. The house, though fractured, seemed to be alive again. Its pulse, its heartbeat still reverberating through the walls. Mary stepped cautiously toward the source of the noise, her legs shaking beneath her. Each step seemed to make the house groan in response, its dark, ancient presence stretching out, pulling her back into its grasp. She felt it now, the call, a pull that she couldn't ignore. The noise grew louder, more distinct. There was something beneath them, something alive, something that had been waiting for them to come back. "We need to leave," Daniel urged, his voice strained. "Now." But Mary couldn't move. She couldn't leave. Not when she could feel it, the thing beneath the floor, beneath the house, crawling back to life. "No," she said firmly, her voice filled with determination. "It's not over. We can't leave yet. I have to finish this." Daniel hesitated, his eyes flickering with confusion and fear. He wanted to go, wanted to escape the house's pull, but Mary knew deep down that if she didn't face this, if she didn't find out what was waiting beneath them, it would haunt her forever. With a final hesitant glance at Daniel, she turned back to the broken floorboards. She crouched down, her hand brushing against the wood. Beneath her fingers, she could feel the tremor, the pulse of something ancient, something dark deep within the house. "It's not over," she said again, her voice low but firm. "It's never over. Not until it's truly gone." And as she pressed deeper into the heart of the house, a terrifying realization dawned on her. The house hadn't been fully destroyed. It was still here, waiting for her to complete the final step. But this time she wouldn't run. She would end it, once and for all. Mary's hand trembled as it pressed against the cracked floorboards, the pulse of something dark and ancient thrumming beneath her fingertips. The house groaned, a deep, hollow sound that seemed to reverberate from the very foundation. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch longer, twisting and crawling like hungry tendrils reaching toward her, pulling at her. The air grew thick with dread, and she could almost feel the walls tightening around her, as if the house was inhaling, preparing for something far worse. Mary Daniel's voice broke through the growing tension, strained and fearful. "Please, this isn't you. Let's go. We're free now. We can leave this place behind." But Mary didn't move. She couldn't. Something in her, something deep and instinctive, told her that if she left now, the house would never truly release its grip. The dark force that had waited so long, feeding on fear and pain, was still alive, pulsing beneath the floor, waiting to resurface. "No," she whispered, her voice low but determined. "I can't leave. Not until I know what's down there." The sound from below had stopped for a moment, but the air remained thick with the presence of something watching, something waiting. Mary could feel the energy shifting around her, could feel the house pulling at her. It wanted her. It needed her to finish what it had started. Her fingers brushed against the jagged edges of the broken floor, and she found a loose board. With a sharp breath, she pulled it away, revealing a narrow, dark passage beneath. The air that poured up from the gap was cold, bitter, and full of the same oppressive weight that had haunted the house for so long. Mary Daniel said again, his voice more urgent now, but still tinged with fear. You don't know what's down there. We don't know what's still in this place. You've seen what it can do to us. Please, let's just go." She turned to face him, her heart pounding, but her eyes filled with something different determination. "I have to do this. You don't understand. It won't stop. Not unless I finish it. It's been waiting for us. For me." Daniel's face paled, and for a moment, Mary saw the man she had fought beside the man she had loved, the man who had been consumed by the very house they now stood in. She could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear she had felt when she had first stepped foot in this cursed place. But she knew now that the house, its malevolent force, would never truly release them unless she ended it. She couldn't leave without knowing the truth. Daniel's gaze softened for a moment, but the fear never left. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to her, but the shadows seemed to reach toward him as well, curling around his feet, creeping up his legs. The dark force in the room seemed to awaken again, hungry for more, and for a fleeting moment, Mary saw something else in Daniel's eyes, something not quite him. She stepped back instinctively, her heart racing. "Daniel," his voice faltered, a tremor in it that Mary had never heard before. "Don't do it, Mary. It will take you too. You'll be lost to it." But Mary couldn't stop. She couldn't let this place win. She stepped closer to the dark passage, her hand still clutching the charm, its dim light flickering weakly in the encroaching darkness. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before descending into the depths. The air grew colder, denser, as she descended the narrow staircase, her footsteps echoing hollowly in the silence. The shadows seemed to close in around her, the darkened space growing tighter with every step. The walls were slick with moisture, their surface cold to the touch. The scent of decay lingered heavy, as if the house had been waiting to be unearthed. The passage twisted and turned, leading her deeper underground, where the silence was broken only by the sound of her breath and the faint creak of the house around her. She could feel the weight of it, the oppressive atmosphere of the house closing in. But she pressed forward, determined to find what lay beneath. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled. She stopped, her heart leaping into her throat. The tremor wasn't just a shift in the earth, it was the house shifting, reacting to her presence. A low hum began to vibrate through the walls, the air growing thick with a low, guttural whisper. It was waiting for her. It had always been waiting for her. You can't leave the voice from below, rasped, distorted, and twisted, coming from the very walls around her. You can never leave. Mary's skin crawled as the voice grew louder, louder, until it felt as though the house itself was screaming in her ears. She reached for the charm, her fingers closing around it, but the light was dim, flickering weakly in the suffocating dark. "Mary," the voice whispered again, this time softer, almost coaxing. "Come closer. Come back to me. You've always belonged here. You'll never be free." The temperature dropped again, the shadows tightening, pulling her in. She could feel it, the house's pull. The evil that had once ruled it was trying to draw her into the depths to consume her, like it had done to so many before. But Mary wouldn't let it. She couldn't let it. With a trembling breath, she pushed forward, fighting against the pull, against the screaming darkness. Her steps quickened as she neared the end of the passage, and then finally she saw it. A small, hidden chamber lay at the end of the passage, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and rot. In the center of the room was something that made her blood run cold. A small altar, built from ancient stone, stood in the center, its surface covered in dark, dried stains. And there, lying in the middle of the altar, was Robert the doll. But this time it was not the toy she had destroyed. It was alive, its face twisted in a grotesque smile, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was no longer just a doll. It was a vessel for the evil that had haunted this place for centuries, Mary's heart skipped a beat. The thing, the house's true form, had never been destroyed. It had merely shifted, and now it was ready for its final act. "You're too late." The doll whispered, its voice coming from the very walls, from the altar itself. "You belong to me, and you always will." The shadows around her grew thicker, crawling toward her with unbearable speed. The light from the charm flickered once more, its pulse growing weaker with each passing second. The darkness pressed in, tightening its grip, suffocating her. The house was still alive, and it would never let her go. The shadows in the hidden chamber seemed to writhe and twist their dark forms, coiling around Mary like serpents, pulling her deeper into their suffocating embrace. The air in the room thickened, the weight of the darkness pressing against her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Her heart raced, her pulse hammering in her ears, but she refused to give in to the overwhelming fear that threatened to swallow her whole. The doll. Robert sat on the altar, its porcelain face twisted into an unnatural, mocking smile. Its eyes gleamed with a malevolent light, its grin widening as it slowly began to shift the shadows around it, responding to its movements. The house, the evil that had consumed this place, was alive, and it had been waiting for her. It had been waiting for this. "You're mine now." The voice hissed again, its tone both sweet and venomous. "You've always been mine." Mary's grip tightened on the charm in her hand. The jade crescent moon still glowed, albeit weakly, but she could feel its warmth, faint but present. She wasn't done yet. The house had tried to take her, to break her, but she wouldn't let it. Not now. Not when she had come this far. "I will not be yours," she whispered through clenched teeth, her voice shaky but filled with resolve. "I will never be yours." The room seemed to tremble, the walls groaning under the weight of her defiance. The shadows pressed in, and the temperature dropped again, the chill biting into her skin like ice. But she stood her ground. The charm pulsed with a faint but steady light, as if responding to her will, to her refusal to give in. The doll on the altar began to twitch its limbs, jerking violently, as if trying to break free from the bonds that held it. The walls around her seemed to close in the house, groaning in protest. But Mary felt something shift, something inside her. The power that had once fueled the house's curse, that had consumed everything it touched, was beginning to crack, and she knew that now was the time to strike. She stepped forward, her body trembling but determined, and she held the charm high, its light growing brighter. The shadows recoiled, hissing in anger, but they couldn't touch her. The warmth from the charm grew stronger, pushing the darkness back inch by inch. The doll's twisted grin faltered as the light from the charm intensified the very air around her, shimmering with the power she had summoned. "You cannot stop me," the voice hissed, but it was weaker now, strained as though the house's power was being shattered. "I already have," Mary whispered, her voice steady, now the certainty of her words cutting through the darkness. "You may have taken Daniel, but I will not let you take me. I will not be your puppet." With one final defiant cry, she thrust the charm forward, the light blazing brighter than ever before. The house screamed in fury, the very walls shaking, as if the very foundation of the place was being torn apart. The shadows writhed and shrieked, but they couldn't escape the light. They were being destroyed. The doll on the altar let out a horrible screech as its form began to distort, its porcelain cracking and splintering, the once lifelike eyes shattering into pieces. The room trembled, the air thick with the energy of the struggle between light and darkness. The shadows screamed, their forms crumbling into nothingness as the house itself began to crumble, its power disintegrating, dissolving into the air like dust. And then, with a final deafening crack, the house shuddered. For a moment, everything was still. The light from the charm faded, its pulse weakening, but the shadows were gone. the oppressive weight that had filled the house, the malevolent presence that had haunted them for so long, had disappeared. The house was no longer alive. It had been destroyed from the inside out, its power shattered by the light of defiance and the love that had fueled it. Mary stood in the center of the chamber, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. The doll's remains lay in pieces at her feet, its twisted smile broken, its eyes shattered. The house was silent, its groans and whispers gone, as if it had never been alive in the first place. But even as the house collapsed, Mary felt a strange sense of emptiness wash over her. She had won. The evil was gone. But something inside her felt broken. She had lost so much. And even though the darkness had been driven away, she knew that the scars it had left would never truly fade. She looked around at the ruins of the house, at the pieces of the doll scattered across the floor, and the remains of the evil that had consumed them all. The house had been more than just a building. It had been a living thing, feeding off fear and pain. And now it was nothing more than a crumbling shell. But what had it left behind? Mary's heart ached as she turned toward the door, the remnants of the house fading behind her. She had faced the darkness, and she had won. But she was still standing in the ruins of everything she had once known. Her family, her life, everything had been touched by this place. And even though the curse was broken, the memory of the house would linger. It always would. She stepped outside, the cool night air filling her lungs. The stars above twinkled brightly, the moon casting its gentle light on the broken house behind her. The world outside was still untouched by the horrors that had plagued her. But as she stood in the quiet of the night, she knew that the battle was over. The evil had been broken. The curse had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, Mary felt like she could breathe again. But deep in her chest, the whispers of the house still lingered like a faint echo of a nightmare she couldn't fully shake. The scars would remain. The cool night air wrapped around Mary as she stepped away from the ruins of the house. The stars above were bright and clear, as though the very sky had been washed clean, offering her a sense of calm she hadn't felt in so long. For the first time since stepping into the house, she could almost believe it was truly over. The house, the curse, the dark force that had fed on fear and pain, it was gone. The terror was over, but Mary couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach, the one that told her that while the battle might have been won, the war had never truly ended. The evil might have been destroyed for now, but she knew that it had left its mark on her, carved into her soul in ways that couldn't be easily erased. The darkness would always linger like a shadow that never quite fades. It had been a part of her, a part of Daniel, a part of her family, a part of everything she had ever known. Even now, as she stood under the stars, she could feel it, a faint, lingering presence, just beyond the edges of her awareness. Was it just the memory of what had happened? Or was it something more? Something deeper? She shook her head, trying to push the thought aside, but it clung to her like the chill in the air. The house may have fallen, but the presence of it, the essence of the evil that had infected the walls, the floors, the very air would never truly leave her. Mary turned her back on the crumbling house and began to walk, her footsteps echoing in the silence each step, taking her further from the place that had nearly destroyed her. The path before her was clear, the night open as though a new chapter in her life was just beginning. She could feel the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders, each step bringing her closer to freedom, to peace. But was it real peace? Her thoughts wandered back to Daniel. She had fought so hard to save him. She had faced the house's evil, the twisted remnants of Robert the doll, and had watched him succumb to the darkness. But somehow, some way, she had brought him back. She had pulled him from the depths of the nightmare they had both been trapped in. Yet, as the stars overhead shimmered, the silence wrapped around her like a blanket. She felt the absence of something, a piece of her, a part of her that had been torn away, taken by the evil that had once ruled the house. Daniel was still with her. She could feel him feel his presence, but there was something different now. He had been lost to the darkness, consumed by it, and though he had returned, she knew that the darkness had changed him, changed them both. They were no longer the people they had been before the house, no longer the couple they had once been. "Daniel," she whispered into the night, her voice a mix of love loss and something else, fear. Fear of the unknown, of what they had become, of what had happened in that house. What had the darkness taken from them? What had it left in its wake? Suddenly the silence was broken by the soft rustling of leaves. Mary stopped in her tracks, her body stiffening. It wasn't the wind. It was too controlled, too deliberate. She turned slowly, her heart racing in her chest, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She could feel it again, the presence. But this time, it wasn't coming from the house. It was near close, and she knew deep down that she wasn't alone. Not anymore. A figure moved in the shadows ahead of her. It was too dark to make out clearly, but the shape was unmistakable. The faint glint of eyes gleaming in the dark fixed on her. "Mary?" Her breath caught in her throat. "Daniel." But it wasn't Daniel's voice. The voice was twisted, distorted, as though it was being pulled from somewhere far beneath the surface. "Mary, I'm sorry." The figure stepped forward, and as the moonlight flickered, she saw it, the face. Not Daniel's. No. This face was something else entirely. Twisted, hollow. The smile that stretched across its lips was familiar, but wrong. It was the smile of Robert the doll, but now it was alive, pulsing with a dark energy. "No," Mary whispered, her voice trembling as she took a step back. No, this isn't real." The figure's smile widened, and the voice, now colder, spoke again. "It's never over, Mary. You can't run from it. It's a part of you now." Mary's breath came in sharp gasps as the figure began to move toward her, its limbs jerking unnaturally. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble, and the night air grew thicker, colder, suffocating. The very shadows around her seemed to pulse, reaching toward the figure. "No," she repeated, shaking her head, stepping back. "You're not real." But the figure only advanced, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light, its movements twisted, its form not entirely human. "I will always be here, Mary." The voice hissed, its tone filled with a sickening satisfaction. "The darkness will always find its way back to you." Mary could feel her legs trembling beneath her. She wasn't sure if it was fear or the weight of the house's lingering presence, but it was hard to breathe, to think. The evil had never left. The house was no longer just the building, it was in her. It was in them. "You can't escape me," the figure repeated, its voice now echoing from all directions, as though the house itself was speaking through it. But then something inside Mary snapped. With a sudden burst of clarity, she raised her hands, the charm still clenched in her fist. Her heart thudded in her chest, but this time the fear was different. It was a controlled fear, a fear she could harness. She had faced the house's darkness before, and she could face it again. She would not be consumed by it. "No," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "I will not let you take me. I will not let you control me." The figure halted in its tracks, its twisted smile faltering. The shadows recoiled as if unsure of her defiance. For a moment, the world around her seemed to pause, the air growing still. The figure was a mockery of the house's power, a remnant of the evil that had once controlled them. But it was weak. She could feel it. The house's power had been broken. The evil had lost. "You've already lost," Mary whispered, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "I won." The figure let out a low, guttural hiss, but the light in its eyes began to fade, the shadows retreating once more, pulling back into the darkness from which they came. "No." The voice whispered, the last remnants of its power crumbling, and with that, the figure vanished. The darkness that had crept in from all directions dissipated, leaving behind a calm stillness that Mary had never thought possible. She stood in the silence, breathing heavily, her body trembling, but she could feel it, the final release. The house was gone. The curse had been broken. The presence that had haunted her, that had tortured her, was no more. For the first time in years, she was truly free. She had faced the darkness and won. And as the night air whispered around her, Mary realized that the shadows would never fully leave her, but they no longer had the power to consume her. The evil had been vanquished, and she at last was free. The night air was still and heavy, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. But for Mary, the feeling of dread had faded. She stood there, her feet planted firmly on the earth beneath her, the weight of the house, its curse finally lifted from her shoulders. The moon above was full, casting a soft silvery light on the broken remains of the house behind her. It looked different now, quiet, empty. What had once been a living, breathing entity was now just a shadow of itself, a husk decaying and abandoned. But despite the peace that was beginning to settle over her, the hollow feeling in her chest remained. There was still something unresolved, something she couldn't yet put her finger on. The house was gone, but had she truly broken the curse? Had she really freed herself, or was there more to this story than she realized? She turned back toward the ruins of the house, her mind spinning with questions. The wind whispered through the trees around her, but the whispers felt different now. They weren't the mocking, haunting whispers of the past. They were calm, peaceful even. Yet in the depths of her heart, she still felt a pull, as if something unfinished lingered in the dark corners of her mind. Mary's breath caught when she thought she heard the faintest sound, almost imperceptible, a whisper. She turned sharply, scanning the horizon, but there was nothing. Just the quiet expanse of the night, the stars above, and the emptiness that stretched in all directions. Her gaze fell once again to the remains of the house. There was a memory there, something she had buried, something she hadn't let herself truly face. She had been running from it all this time. But now, standing in the quiet of the night, with everything she had fought for in ruins, she knew she couldn't outrun it anymore. The whisper came again, clearer now. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, Mary. Her heart lurched in her chest, a cold chill creeping down her spine. It was his voice, Daniel's. She could hear the warmth in it, the love. But there was something else, something that felt off. It was like the house had imprinted itself on him, had twisted his very essence, even as he fought to return to her. "Mary, Daniel," she called out, her voice trembling, her pulse quickening. But there was no answer, just the sound of the wind and the rustling of the leaves. She stepped forward toward the remains of the house, feeling the pull of his voice tugging at her heartstrings, urging her to come closer. With each step, she felt herself drawn back to it, as if the house was still alive, still calling her back. And with it, the dread she had tried to bury began to rise again, coiling around her chest. But this time, it wasn't the house that controlled her. It wasn't the evil that had consumed them. She had learned to fight, to resist. She wouldn't let it take her again. Not like this. "I'm here," she whispered into the night. Her voice was steady, unwavering. "I'm still here, Daniel." For a moment, everything fell silent again. The wind stopped rustling through the trees. The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something. And then, as if from a distance, she heard it. The sound of footsteps. Soft but unmistakable. "Mary!" The voice was clearer now, closer. But still not quite right. It sounded like Daniel, but it was twisted somehow as though it were echoing from a dark, hidden place. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Mary felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She wasn't sure if it was the darkness or if it was her own fear that was growing, but she knew one thing, whatever this was. It wasn't the Daniel she had once known. She turned her breath, caught in her throat, and she saw him, standing just at the edge of the ruins. His form was shadowed, barely visible in the dark. His outline was familiar, his silhouette, but his face was hidden in the shadows. "Daniel." Her voice cracked, filled with hope, but also a deep, gnawing fear. He stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate. The air grew colder around her, and the shadows seemed to stretch, pulling at her, closing in on the space between them. "Come closer." The voice called out again, but this time it was no longer Daniel's voice. It had twisted, becoming something darker, something that didn't belong. Her heart slammed in her chest. The figure before her stepped into the light, revealing its face, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The man standing before her wasn't Daniel at all. It was Robert, the doll in human form or something like it. Its face was twisted into a grotesque parody of the man she had loved, its eyes black, empty pits devoid of humanity. "You thought you could escape it," hissed its lips, curling into an unnatural smile. "You thought you could defeat me, but you are still mine." Mary took a step back, her heart racing, the realization washing over her like cold water. This wasn't Daniel. This was another manifestation of the house's curse, another twisted form the darkness had taken. And it was here, standing before her, its presence suffocating, heavy and wrong. The figure stepped closer, its limbs jerking unnaturally as if it was struggling to control its own body. But there was something in its eyes, something familiar. It wasn't just Robert. It was something else. It was the house. "No," she whispered, her voice steady, despite the fear rising in her chest. "You have no power over me anymore." The figure stopped its smile, faltering, its head tilting as if considering her words. Then in an instant, its expression changed. Its face twisted into a snarl, the empty eyes glowing with a fierce, malevolent energy. "You are mine, Mary." Mary clenched the charm in her hand, her fingers digging into the jade crescent moon. The warmth that had once comforted her began to return, the light flickering and growing brighter, pushing the darkness back. But it wasn't enough. She could feel it, the evil pressing in around her, fighting to consume her once again. "No," she breathed, her voice low but firm. "You don't control me. I control this." With a surge of determination, she lifted the charm high, and the light flooded the space around her, pushing back against the figure and the shadows. The darkness recoiled, screeching in agony, as the light from the charm flared brighter, stronger than ever before. But the figure only grinned wider, its laugh echoing through the night. "It's too late, Mary. You will belong to me." Mary's hand shook, but her will was stronger. "I don't belong to you," she said, her voice steady, her grip tightening around the charm. "I belong to myself." The house roared in response, the earth beneath her feet trembling, as if the entire foundation of the world was shaking. But Mary stood firm, her gaze locked on the twisted figure before her. With a final surge of light, the charm flared brighter than ever before, its energy rippling through the air, flooding the ruins of the house. The figure screamed, its form cracking, breaking apart as the light consumed it. And then, with a final deafening scream, the presence shattered. The figure crumbled into nothingness, its essence dissolving into the air, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The shadows were gone. The house, the evil, was finally defeated. And this time Mary knew it was over. The silence that followed felt almost too still, as if the earth itself had exhaled a long-held breath. Mary stood there, her body trembling, the weight of the final battle lifting from her shoulders. The shattered remnants of Robert the doll, the twisted figure that had once been the heart of this house's curse, disappeared into the darkness, leaving no trace, no echo, nothing. The air around her had changed. It was lighter now, almost clear, and for the first time since she had entered this nightmare, she felt free. But that feeling, however real, felt fleeting. Her mind raced with thoughts and questions that couldn't quite be answered. The house was gone, its power broken, but the events that had transpired here were not easily forgotten. The memories of Daniel's twisted form of the shadows that had clung to him still haunted her. There would be no simple return to the life she had once known. Something inside her had been forever altered by what had happened here. She could feel it, like a weight in her chest. She turned toward the ruins of the house, now standing silent and still before her. It looked like nothing more than a shell, a husk of its former self. The oppressive energy that had once consumed everything was gone, but the house itself felt empty. Not in the way that a vacant space might feel, but in a deep, aching way, as if it had taken something from her, something she could never get back. A breeze blew across the landscape, rustling the leaves, and Mary closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the cool air, trying to steady herself. Her fingers, still clutching the jade crescent moon charm, felt cold. The warmth it had once given her was gone, leaving only the faintest fading glow. The charm had been her lifeline, her constant source of strength, and now it felt like the last reminder of the darkness she had just escaped. "It's over," she whispered, the words escaping her lips before she could fully process them. The feeling of emptiness grew stronger as she took in the damage to the house. The walls, once towering and imposing, were now nothing but fractured beams of wood and crumbled stone. The windows, shattered beyond recognition, seemed to gape like open wounds. The place that had once been the heart of so much terror now stood as little more than ruins, abandoned by the very force that had given it life. Her heart tightened in her chest. She had faced it all, the evil, the fear, the loss, and she had emerged victorious. But it came with a price. The echoes of the house's malevolent energy were still there, lingering in the corners of her mind. It was as if the house had left a mark on her, a stain she couldn't wash away. What now? She asked aloud, her voice hollow. She didn't expect an answer. She didn't even know what the question meant. What came after all of this? How could she return to normal, to real life, after everything that had happened? But then she remembered Daniel. The real Daniel. The man she had fought so hard to bring back from the edge of the darkness. She had seen his true self, his love for her, the flicker of recognition that had pierced through the curse. She had freed him from the evil that had consumed him, and she had freed herself from the grip of the house. Her heart lifted just a little. She turned away from the ruins and walked back toward the edge of the clearing, where the moonlight bathed the landscape in its soft, pale glow. The night was still. She could feel the pull of the memories of everything she had survived, but there was also something new, something brighter calling to her. It wasn't the house anymore. It wasn't the darkness. It was something she hadn't felt in so long. Hope. The weight of the past would always linger like shadows stretching across the edges of her thoughts. The scars, the trauma, those would never disappear completely. But she had learned something through all of this. She had learned that even in the deepest darkness, there was always a way out. She had fought for her life, for Daniel's life, and she had won. And that victory, however small, however fragile, was hers. She stepped away from the clearing, her footsteps soft on the earth beneath her. She felt the ground firm beneath her feet, each step, taking her farther from the nightmare, farther from the house. But she also knew that no matter where she went, the memories would stay with her. The lessons learned would never fade. She had survived, she had overcome, and for the first time since she had entered that cursed house, she didn't feel alone. Daniel was with her, not in body, but in spirit. He had been lost to the house, but he had returned to her in a way. The house had tried to take everything from her, to break her down, but she had fought back. She had kept him alive in her heart, and that was something no evil force could take from her. The road ahead was uncertain, but Mary felt stronger now, more at peace with herself than she had ever felt before. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more struggles, but she knew that whatever came next, she had the strength to face it. As she walked into the night, the world stretched out before her, vast and open. And in the distance, she could see the horizon, wide, infinite, full of possibilities. The house was gone. The evil was defeated, and she was free. But the scars, the memories would stay with her. They would shape her, guide her, and remind her of the strength she had found within herself. And as the stars twinkled above, she felt something else too: hope. A hope for a future where the darkness could never touch her again. The road stretched out before her like a ribbon of possibility, winding through the quiet countryside under the moonlit sky. Mary's footsteps were soft on the dirt path, her body weary from the long night of terror, but her heart had begun to find a rhythm of its own. The weight of the past, the crushing burden of the house's malevolent energy, had finally begun to lift. And with it, the fog that had clouded her mind slowly began to clear. But despite the overwhelming sense of freedom that came with walking away from the house, there was still a feeling of unfinished business. The journey she had started wasn't over. The battle had been won, but the cost had been high. The memories of the house, the evil and the terror it had wrought, would stay with her, etched into her soul forever. The charm she still held in her hand pulsed faintly in the dark, its jade crescent moon still warm to the touch. It had been her guide through the worst of the darkness. It had been the light when there seemed to be no way forward. But now it too felt different. The energy that had once surged through it seemed subdued, its glow flickering like the last embers of a dying fire. Her gaze shifted to the horizon ahead. The stars shone bright in the clear sky, a tapestry of endless possibilities stretched out before her. The world in all its vastness felt open and new, and yet it also felt fragile. She had been broken, consumed, and then reborn, and the process had left a mark on her. She had felt the house's evil seep into her bones, had watched as it twisted Daniel into something unrecognizable, something inhuman. But now, as she stood on the cusp of a new beginning, she felt something else, something beyond fear, beyond loss. There was hope, hope that no matter the scars left by the darkness, she could rebuild, that she could heal, and that despite everything the house had taken from her, she had the power to reclaim her life. Her steps grew steadier as she walked the path now familiar beneath her feet. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The world outside the house had its own struggles, its own burdens. But for the first time in so long, she felt ready to face them. The whisper of a voice reached her ears again, faint but unmistakable. "Mary!" She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The voice, it was Daniel's voice. But this time it wasn't twisted or distorted. It was soft, clear, filled with warmth. "Daniel," she whispered into the night, her voice filled with longing. But there was no response. Her heart fluttered with hope, and a sudden ache settled in her chest. Daniel had been a part of the house's curse, a prisoner of its evil. She had freed him, brought him back, and yet a part of her still wondered if she had truly brought him back whole. She stopped walking, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes scanned the darkness ahead, but there was no sign of him, no physical presence. But his voice still echoed in her mind. "I'm here." She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the silence around her. The wind rustled the leaves in the trees. The distant croak of a frog reverberated through the night, and for a moment, she could almost feel Daniel's presence beside her, but just as quickly as the sensation came, it left. Mary exhaled her hands, trembling. She couldn't chase shadows, not when they were all she had left. She had to move forward, had to keep going. With a deep, steadying breath, she started walking again, her steps stronger now, the weight of her burden lifting with every step she took. But even as she moved forward, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still with her. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how much of Daniel she had truly saved, or how much of the house's evil remained within her. But one thing she did know: she wasn't going to let fear hold her back any longer. She had faced the darkness and survived, and she would do so again. The night stretched on calm and quiet, and Mary walked into the unknown. And though the house, its evil, and its curse had been broken, the shadows of the past would always linger like a whisper in the wind, a reminder of what she had overcome. Mary walked for hours, the moonlight guiding her through the quiet countryside. The weight of her journey hung heavy in the air, but there was a strange sense of peace beginning to settle in her chest. The house was gone, the darkness vanquished. But she couldn't escape the feeling that something was still watching, waiting just beyond the edge of her awareness. The night was too still, too quiet. The distant sound of crickets, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the soft chirp of birds in the distance, everything felt normal. And yet Mary couldn't shake the nagging sensation that she wasn't truly alone. The world had gone back to its natural rhythm, but a part of her mind kept circling back to the haunting question: was it really over? The road ahead was empty, stretching out into the horizon, and for a brief moment Mary felt that old familiar sense of loss. She had lost so much: her home, her family, her sense of security. But now the future seemed wide open, and that wide openness both comforted and terrified her. She had come so far. She had survived the house's horrors, fought through the darkness, and even saved Daniel in the process. But now, as she walked through the night, she wondered if they could ever be truly free from the scars the house had left on them. The voice. Daniel's voice still echoed faintly in her mind. He had been lost to the house, twisted by its darkness, but somehow he had come back to her. Was he truly free? Was she? Her thoughts wandered, and as they did, the landscape around her shifted. The road began to narrow, and the trees on either side grew denser, their branches twisting and reaching out like skeletal fingers. The path ahead grew darker, the shadows deeper. Mary paused, her senses sharpening. Something felt off. Her footsteps faltered, and she scanned the darkened path ahead, suddenly aware of how the silence had shifted. The breeze had died down, the crickets had stopped chirping, and the world around her seemed to hold its breath. The unmistakable feeling of being watched gripped her again. She turned slowly, her eyes searching the darkness behind her. At first, there was nothing, just the stretch of road she had walked down. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something, a flicker. Her pulse quickened. It was too dark, too still. Daniel," she whispered, her voice tentative, filled with both longing and fear. But no answer came, only the sound of the wind rustling the trees. Mary's breath quickened as the world around her seemed to grow more oppressive. The shadows seemed to stretch further, inching closer. The air grew thick, like the house was still there, pulling at her, trying to consume her once more. She stepped back instinctively, her hand clutching the jade crescent moon charm. The warmth from it was gone, its glow dim, and the charm felt heavy, like it was burdened with the weight of everything that had happened. Had it truly lost its power? Or was it just a part of her mind, the lingering remnants of the darkness that refused to let go? The trees ahead parted slightly, revealing a small clearing, and in the center of the clearing stood a figure. Mary's breath caught in her throat. It was Daniel, or it looked like Daniel, but his form was wrong. His body stood stiff, unmoving, like a marionette suspended on invisible strings. His face, once so full of warmth, was now hollow, empty, like the porcelain face of Robert the doll. His eyes were black, featureless, and the expression on his face was twisted, not with love or familiarity, but with something dark and unfamiliar. "Daniel," Mary whispered again, but her voice trembled, uncertainty flooding her chest. The figure in front of her didn't respond. It simply stood there, its body unmoving except for the faintest twitch of its limbs. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't him. It couldn't be. The shadows around her grew darker, the air colder, suffocating. The wind picked up again, rustling the trees in a low, mournful sound. And then, just as suddenly as the figure had appeared, it stepped forward, its movement jerky, unnatural, as though it was being controlled by some outside force. Mary's heart pounded in her chest. This thing wasn't Daniel. This was something else, something worse. The figure took another step toward her, and its voice, distorted and hollow, echoed out, sending a ripple of dread through her entire being. "You cannot escape me," it rasped, its tone deep and mocking. "You belong to me now, forever." The darkness around her seemed to pulse the air, thick with malevolent energy. The house's curse had not been fully eradicated. It had followed her. It had been waiting for her to let her guard down, to believe that the nightmare was over. And now it was ready to finish what it had started. Mary's feet froze to the ground as she tried to comprehend the sight before her. This was no longer Daniel. This was the house, or at least the thing that had consumed him. It had been waiting, lurking in the shadows, and now it had found her again. Her hand trembled as it tightened around the charm, but its faint glow didn't seem to have the same power it once did. Her mind raced. What could she do? "I will never belong to you," she said aloud, her voice shaking, but filled with defiance. She could feel the presence of the evil pressing in around her, but she wouldn't let it take her. Not like this. The figure continued to move closer, its face never changing its eyes, black pits hungry for her fear. The air felt thicker, heavier, the ground beneath her feet sinking ever so slightly, like the house itself was drawing her back into its grasp. The figure opened its mouth again, its voice a low hiss. "It's too late. You will never escape." But just as it reached for her, something inside Mary snapped. The charm in her hand surged with light, the jade crescent glowing brightly. For the first time in hours, the light grew stronger, pulsing with an energy that shook the earth beneath her. The darkness recoiled and the figure faltered, its form flickering. The shadows screamed, their voices rising in frustration, but they couldn't stop the light. The charm flared with a brilliance that consumed the night. The air hummed with the power of her defiance, and the figure in front of her withered. It screamed in agony, its form collapsing into the shadows, its black eyes glowing for a final moment before they disappeared, leaving nothing but the dark, empty silence. The night returned to stillness. The oppressive energy that had filled the air was gone. The dark figure, whatever it had been, was gone. Mary stood there, her breath ragged, her body trembling with the effort it had taken to fight this last lingering shadow. The charm, now glowing faintly, was still in her hand. It had been the source of her strength, her will to fight against the evil that had followed her. And now it was finally over. But even in the silence that followed, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows would always be there. Not outside of her, but within. The house, the curse, it had left its mark on her, and it always would. But for now at least the darkness was gone. She exhaled the weight of everything lifting for a moment. She was free, truly free, and with that, she began to walk forward, leaving the remnants of the curse behind her. But the night and the road ahead would never be the same. The night stretched on, and the road before Mary felt endless. The full weight of everything that had happened, the house, the curse, the loss, and the fight for survival, seemed to catch up with her all at once. Her body was exhausted, her mind spinning with the aftermath of it all. Yet as she walked, she couldn't help but feel that the world around her had changed forever. The light from the moon bathed the path ahead in soft silver light, but even the calm beauty of the night couldn't erase the shadows in her mind. She had defeated the house, but in doing so had she destroyed a part of herself too. The charm in her hand was still warm, but its glow was faint, almost dim. It had been her light in the darkness, her protection against the malevolent force that had haunted her. But now, as she walked down the quiet path, she could feel it, the absence of something. The house was gone. The evil had been driven away. But the toll it had taken on her was permanent. I should feel free, she whispered to herself, the words barely audible. I should feel like I can breathe again. But the truth was, Mary wasn't sure she could ever be the same. She had faced the darkness, survived it, but she could feel the remnants of it lingering in the corners of her soul. The house hadn't just been a physical place. It had been a manifestation of something deeper, something older, something that lived inside of her now, just as it had lived inside of the house. She stopped walking for a moment, her breath catching as she looked up at the stars. The vastness of the sky above her was overwhelming. It felt empty, just as she felt empty. The silence around her was a deep, hollow kind of quiet. There was no evil, no darkness that clung to the air, but still something was missing. The absence of the house was like a wound that hadn't yet healed. She had destroyed its physical form, its very foundation, but its essence, its memory was still inside her. The pull of it, the weight of everything she had lost remained. As she stood there lost in thought, the wind picked up again, stirring the air around her. But this time, it didn't feel like the whispering of the house's malevolent force. It felt different, soft, gentle. Mary turned her head toward the sound, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw something moving in the distance. Just a shadow, a flicker in the periphery of her vision. It was too quick, too faint, but the sensation was unmistakable. Something was watching her. The chill that ran down her spine was familiar, but this time it wasn't fear. It was the sensation of being aware of something or someone lingering just beyond her grasp. It was the house, yes, but it was also her. The house had taken so much from her, but in doing so, it had also become a part of her. Her connection to it wasn't just through the charm or the battles she had fought. It was deeper than that. She had survived, yes, but the cost had been her soul. Her peace. I'm not done, she murmured to herself, her voice firm but quiet. This isn't over. Not for me. For a moment, everything seemed to go still, and Mary stood there, her hand still clutching the charm. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for, whether it was an answer or a sign, but she felt the truth deep in her bones. The house hadn't been her only enemy. The battle hadn't only been against the malevolent force that had consumed the house, the doll, and Daniel. The battle had always been against herself. A soft breeze passed by her, and the shadow she had glimpsed earlier appeared again this time, clearer, darker. A figure in the distance just beyond the edge of the road, standing in the shadows of the trees. Mary's heart quickened in her chest. Was it Daniel? No. Her pulse throbbed in her ears as she took a cautious step forward. The figure remained still, unmoving, standing at the edge of her vision, just at the corner where the trees gave way to open space. The moonlight seemed to bend around it, casting a long, eerie shadow. She took another step, then another. The air around her felt thick, charged, but this time it wasn't the oppressive darkness she had known in the house. It was different. This was the weight of something watching her, something waiting. But for the first time, it didn't feel threatening. It didn't feel like the darkness had returned. Instead, it felt like waiting. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady, her heart racing. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew that she couldn't turn back now. The figure didn't move at first, but as her words hung in the air, it shifted, stepping forward into the light. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Robert. It wasn't the house's curse trying to claim her once again. It was her. Mary took an unsteady step back. The figure standing before her was an exact replica of herself. Her face, her body, but the eyes. The eyes were wrong. They were dark, too dark, filled with an emptiness that mirrored the darkness of the house. For a moment, Mary didn't know what to say, how to react. She wanted to run, wanted to turn and escape. But her feet felt rooted to the ground. This thing, this reflection of herself, was not a ghost, not an echo of the house. This was something more. The figure smiled at her, soft, sad, and full of understanding. "It's not over, is it?" It asked, its voice a perfect mimicry of her own, but filled with a strange melancholy. Mary's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" The figure stepped closer, the shadows around it clinging like smoke curling around its limbs. "You know, the house is gone, but it's a part of you now. You carry it with you. You always have." Mary shook her head, trying to push the figure away with her thoughts. "No, it's over. The house, the curse, it's gone." But the figure shook its head gently, as though it were trying to comfort her. "You fought hard, Mary. You fought with everything you had. But the house never leaves. The darkness, the fear, it's part of you now." Mary felt her knees weaken, but she refused to fall. The figure's words hurt like sharp shards of glass. It wasn't what she wanted to hear. It wasn't the relief she had been hoping for. "I won," she said again, more forcefully this time. "I broke it. I'm free." The figure's smile softened, a sad sort of understanding in its gaze. "You're free, yes. But the house, it never fully leaves. The darkness will always follow you, Mary. It's not just the house. It's everything. Everything you've faced. Everything you fought. And now it's inside you." The weight of those words settled deep into her bones. It wasn't a curse she could run from. It was something she would carry with her forever, whether she wanted to or not. But in that moment, Mary realized something. The darkness wasn't her enemy. It wasn't something to be destroyed. It was part of her strength, part of her resilience. She had fought, it survived it, and now she could live with it. The figure faded back into the shadows, its last words lingering in the night air. "You're free, but you'll always carry it with you. Always." As the figure disappeared, Mary stood alone under the stars, her chest heavy, but her heart filled with the knowledge that she would never truly be free of the darkness. But now, she had the strength to carry it with her, and that was enough. The quiet that followed the figure's disappearance felt heavy, like the air had thickened, settling into an almost unnatural stillness. The stars above, though brilliant, seemed far too distant now. Their beauty, once a comforting reminder of the world beyond the house, now felt like an unattainable dream, one that Mary wasn't sure she could ever fully embrace again. But in the midst of that silence, a thought slowly began to form in her mind. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. The dark presence, the curse of the house, the thing that had twisted her life and haunted her every step, had never truly left. The shadows had followed her, not because they were chasing her, but because they had become a part of her. They were woven into the fabric of her being, as much a part of her existence as her love for Daniel or her fight for survival. And yet she realized this was not a defeat. This wasn't a surrender to the darkness. No, this was an acceptance. The darkness had never been her true enemy. It had tested her, torn her down, forced her to grow in ways she hadn't expected. But now she had the power to carry it live with it, without it consuming her. As she stood there staring into the empty road ahead, the weight of that realization settled in her chest. She had survived. The battle had been long and painful, but she had won. The house, the curse, the doll. It was all gone. The dark presence she carried with her was no longer an evil force. It was just a part of her, and that truth gave her a sense of peace she had been searching for since she first stepped foot into the cursed house. Mary looked down at her hand, still gripping the jade crescent moon charm, now dim and nearly lifeless. But even in its dimming light, she could still feel it, the power she had drawn from it, the strength that had carried her through. She had used the charm to fight back the darkness, but now she didn't need it anymore. It had fulfilled its purpose. It had helped her overcome the evil of the house. The world ahead felt different, but it wasn't the frightening unknown it had once been. It was a place for new beginnings, her beginning. "I can live now," Mary said softly to herself, the words almost foreign on her tongue. For so long she had been afraid, trapped by the fear of the darkness, haunted by the memories of the house. But now she could face the world with new eyes. She turned, taking one last glance at the ruins of the house. It stood there, still broken and decaying. It had taken so much from her, but it had also given her something she couldn't fully explain. Strength, clarity, a sense of self she hadn't known existed, and with that, she took a step forward, leaving the ruins of the house behind her. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Mary felt ready to walk it. The house and its curse had tried to break her, to destroy everything she loved. But in the end, it was she who had prevailed. As she walked, the world around her began to shift. The once oppressive darkness that had consumed the house and her life seemed to recede like the tide drawing back from the shore. The world was open again, filled with possibilities she hadn't dared to dream of. She could hear the rustling of the wind through the trees, the chirping of crickets in the distance, and the distant sound of a stream trickling through the forest. The sounds of life, real life, were all around her. The house, the darkness, the curse, all of it was behind her now. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of a new beginning. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that cursed house. She wasn't the same woman who had been broken, lost, consumed by the evil that had taken over her life. She was stronger, she was whole, and she was ready to live. The road ahead seemed endless, but Mary knew deep down that it didn't matter. It was her road now. She had earned the right to walk it, and with each step she moved further away from the house, further away from the darkness that had tried to define her. She could feel the shadows still lingering behind her, but they no longer had a hold on her. They were no longer her enemy. They were just a part of her, and she could carry them with grace. As she walked into the night, her footsteps steady and sure, she knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, she would face it. She had the strength to survive, to keep going no matter what, and that was all that mattered. The journey ahead stretched on the road winding through the quiet countryside, but Mary no longer felt the fear that had plagued her for so long. The weight of the past, the crushing burden of the house's curse, had finally lifted. As she walked into the darkness of the night, her footsteps were lighter than they had been in years. The once oppressive air, filled with the haunting whispers of the house, was now just a memory fading with each step. But even as she felt the pull of freedom, there was something else, something deeper that she couldn't fully shake. The shadows still lingered in the corners of her mind, like faint echoes of a nightmare that would never fully let go. She could feel them stretching back into the recesses of her thoughts, the remnants of the house and its curse. The house was gone, but its impact would stay with her forever. For now, though, she kept moving forward. The world around her had returned to its natural rhythm, the soft rustling of leaves in the trees and the distant call of an owl breaking the silence of the night. The air smelled fresh, clean, like the earth itself was breathing again. Mary reached a small clearing in the woods, the moonlight filtering through the branches of the trees, casting long, ghostly shadows on the ground. She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. She couldn't help but feel the pull of the past, the weight of everything she had left behind. The house was still there in her heart, in her mind, a part of her that she could never truly escape. But she was alive. She had survived. The shadows might always be with her, but they could no longer control her. With a deep breath, Mary moved forward, the sound of her footsteps muffled by the soft grass beneath her feet. She had faced the darkness, had fought for her life, and now the world was hers. The possibilities stretched out before her, like an endless sky, the stars shining brightly overhead, offering her hope. Her journey was far from over. The scars of the past would always be a part of her, but they would no longer define her. She had been broken, but she had rebuilt herself. She had been consumed by fear, but she had fought back. The road ahead was still uncertain, but that uncertainty was no longer a source of terror. It was a blank canvas waiting for her to paint her future. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, her voice steady and firm. The words felt real now, a promise to herself that she would keep moving forward no matter what. The wind picked up, rustling the trees above her, and for a brief moment, she thought she heard something, just a faint whisper in the air. She stopped, turning her head, but when she looked around, there was nothing. The forest was silent once more, the night still and peaceful. She smiled softly to herself, shaking her head. It was the remnants of the house's curse, the last whispers of the darkness trying to hold on. But it wasn't real. It was just her now. Mary continued down the path, her pace steady and confident, her heart beating in time with the rhythm of the earth beneath her feet. The night felt different now, softer, more alive. The shadows that had once consumed her were still there, lingering, but they no longer had the power to drag her back. She had escaped them. She had escaped the house, and she had won. The road ahead was long, but she was ready for it. She had learned that the darkness could never truly be defeated. It could only be endured, embraced, and lived with. The house, its evil, its curse, they were all behind her. But they would never be truly gone. They would be a part of her always. The shadows might try to return, but Mary would never let them take control again. She would fight. And as the moonlight bathed her path, as the stars watched silently from above, Mary knew that she was free. Free to live, free to love, free to be. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. The house had broken her, twisted her, but in the end, it had also forged something new. It had forged her, and she was finally whole again. The wind had picked up, swirling around her like an old friend brushing against Mary's face as she walked. The night seemed to stretch out before her, endlessly, the path ahead, unclear, shrouded by the darkness. But she felt no fear. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight in her chest had lifted. The house, its malevolent grip, the suffocating fear, the darkness that had followed her so long was gone. She was free, but freedom, she realized, was not as simple as she had hoped. It wasn't just walking away from the ruins of the house and stepping into the unknown. It was more than that. It was the burden of carrying the past with her, of understanding that what she had fought for had not been without cost. As the path meandered through the forest, the air grew colder, the ground beneath her feet softer, more uncertain. She could still hear the rustling of leaves around her, but there was an eerie stillness in the night, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She stopped for a moment and looked around, feeling the pull of the silence. It was as if the world itself had been waiting for her to take this final step. The road behind her, the house, the curse, it was all behind her now, but ahead lay the unknown. A journey into something new, something she couldn't fully comprehend, but something she knew she had to face. The wind whispered through the trees again, but this time it was different. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't the echo of the house. It was the sound of release. The earth was sighing, as if to say that all things, even the darkest of them, must come to an end. And yet, despite the sense of peace that was beginning to settle in her heart, there was a part of her that still questioned the truth of it all. Could she really be free? Could the curse, the house, the shadows really be gone? Her fingers instinctively reached for the charm again, and for a brief moment she thought she felt its pulse. It wasn't as strong as it had been, but it was there, still there in her grip. A small spark, a flicker of energy that refused to be extinguished. She wondered if it would always be like this, carrying a piece of the past within her, no matter how hard she tried to leave it behind. And yet, she wasn't afraid, in a way that was comforting. It was a reminder of everything she had survived, everything she had fought through. Mary took a deep breath and resumed walking, her steps lighter now, though still cautious. The road before her had become a metaphor for her own journey, a journey that had no clear direction, no clear end, but one that she had to walk step by step. The night was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant chirp of crickets, but it felt alive, the kind of alive that she hadn't felt in so long. The world wasn't chasing her anymore. The evil wasn't chasing her. She wasn't running from the shadows. She was walking through them. As she made her way down the road, Mary couldn't help but notice the quiet beauty that surrounded her. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting soft beams of light onto the ground. The darkness wasn't something to be afraid of anymore. It was simply a part of the night, just like the stars. Her thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of water, a stream perhaps running somewhere just out of sight. It was soothing, the sound of flowing water, something that had always symbolized life and renewal. She followed the sound, curious, until she came upon a small clearing where a gentle stream wound its way through the forest. The water shimmered in the moonlight, its surface smooth, reflecting the stars above. Mary knelt by the edge of the stream, dipping her fingers into the cool water. The sensation was grounding, refreshing, like a cool breeze on a hot day. For the first time in years, she felt connected to the earth, to the world around her, instead of being isolated in her own fear and confusion. The water seemed to wash away the last of the tension that had been building inside her, leaving her calm, steady. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the serenity of the moment settle over her. The darkness had been defeated. The house was gone. And she was alive, more alive than she had been in a long time. She stood, brushing the dirt from her hands, and looked out over the stream. The forest ahead was still calm, and the night seemed peaceful. Yet somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that the darkness wasn't completely gone. It would always be with her, lurking in the corners of her thoughts, in the quietest moments of her life. But she was no longer afraid of it. It had lost its power over her. She had fought it, defeated it, and now she carried it with her, not as a curse, but as a part of who she was. She was finally free. She took one last look at the stream, the calm waters flowing by, and then turned away. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she was ready to walk it. She was ready to face whatever came next, whatever challenges lay ahead, because she knew now that she had the strength to overcome them. As Mary continued down the quiet path, the weight of the night no longer felt as suffocating. The road ahead stretched endlessly beneath the clear sky, and the further she walked, the more at peace she began to feel. The air was crisp, the night alive with the sounds of distant nature. The stars above twinkled like distant fires, each one a small beacon in the vast darkness. For the first time in so long, Mary felt a sense of belonging to the world around her. She was no longer running from the past. The house, its evil, was behind her. But even though the darkness had faded, she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't fully escaped it. She knew better than anyone that evil didn't always wear a face, didn't always come in the form of haunted houses or cursed dolls. Sometimes it lived inside you. The darkness wasn't just in the house, it was in her heart, in her memories, in the shadows of her soul. It had shaped her, defined her, and even as she walked away from the ruins of the past, she knew that it would always be a part of her, but now it didn't control her. The journey she had started was far from over, and as Mary walked deeper into the night, she knew that the road ahead would be long, but she was ready for it. She had survived. She had fought for her life for Daniel, and now she had to fight for something else, her future. Her thoughts drifted back to Daniel, and for a moment, her chest tightened with longing. The man she had loved, the man she had fought to bring back from the darkness, was gone, replaced by something twisted, something that had been consumed by the house's curse. He had been lost, but he had also returned. In a way, she had saved him, but she had also lost him. Mary's heart ached with the realization that in some ways she had already let him go. She had fought for him, but the darkness had taken more than just his body. It had taken his soul, and in doing so, it had taken a part of hers as well. She shook her head, trying to banish the thoughts from her mind. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past any longer. The house had taken everything it could from her. She wouldn't let it take her future. As she walked the forest around, her seemed to grow denser. The shadows longer, the trees more twisted. The road had become less defined, the ground beneath her feet softer, uneven. She paused for a moment, sensing a change in the air. The wind had died down, leaving a strange stillness in its place. It was almost as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. A feeling of unease began to creep up on her again, and Mary felt her heart rate quicken. She wasn't alone anymore. She hadn't been since the house. The shadows seemed to stretch in every direction, pressing against her, closing in. She stopped her breath shallow and glanced around. The forest, the night, everything felt too quiet, too still. Her mind raced, remembering the feeling of being watched, the sense that something had always been there lurking in the shadows. The house had been a physical place, but the evil it had unleashed wasn't bound by walls or doors. It was inside her now, part of her every thought, every breath. Suddenly, she felt it, a presence just beyond the tree line. It was faint at first, like a whisper at the edge of her senses, but it was growing stronger. "Mary!" Her heart skipped a beat. The voice. It was soft, familiar, but still tinged with the same distortion she had heard before. It was Daniel's voice, but different. Twisted. She took a hesitant step back, her eyes darting to the darkness beyond the trees. The shadows seemed to move now, like dark tendrils reaching for her, pulling at her. It wasn't the house. This wasn't the house anymore. This was something else. Something she could no longer escape. "Come closer, Mary." The voice beckoned her again, sweet and soothing, but filled with an eerie undercurrent of something darker. "I'm waiting for you." Mary's breath caught in her throat. She knew better than to follow the voice. She had heard it before, the darkness trying to lure her in, trying to pull her back into its grasp. It had never truly let her go. Her eyes searched the shadows, but all she saw were the trees and the thick, impenetrable darkness beyond them. She had come so far, faced so much, but could she truly leave the house behind? Could she truly escape it? "No," she whispered to herself, shaking her head. "I'm done. It's over. It's finished." But the voice came again, this time louder, more insistent. "It's not over, Mary. You can't leave. You belong here with me." The shadows stretched toward her, and for a moment she was frozen, caught between the desire to run and the pull of the darkness. The air seemed to thicken, suffocating her, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. The shadows receded, and the forest was still once more. Mary stood there for what felt like an eternity, her heart racing, her body tense. The silence was deafening. Slowly, she exhaled, the tension in her chest easing. It was over. The house, the curse, the evil, it was all gone. But as she took another step forward, the shadows seemed to shift again, just out of the corner of her eye. A figure standing motionless in the distance. She turned quickly, her heart leaping into her throat. There, standing at the edge of the trees, was Daniel. His form was barely visible in the dark, but she knew it was him. His eyes gleamed in the moonlight, his body still and rigid. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. He didn't move. "Daniel," she called again, this time louder, her heart pounding with hope. But the figure didn't respond. It just stood there, motionless, its face obscured by the shadows. The air around her seemed to grow colder again, the night still and thick with a sense of impending dread. The shadows closed in once more, and she felt the unmistakable pull of fear in her chest. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're not him." The figure didn't answer, but as she stood there staring at it, she felt the weight of the past and the darkness pressing in around her. She wasn't sure if the figure was real, if it was Daniel, or if it was just another manifestation of the curse she couldn't escape. But as the figure remained motionless, a realization hit her. She couldn't keep running. She couldn't keep looking for the ghosts of the past. The house, the curse, it had taken so much from her. But it hadn't taken her strength. It hadn't taken her ability to move forward. With that thought, she turned away from the figure, walking with steady steps into the darkness. She wasn't afraid anymore. The shadows would always follow her, but they didn't control her. She was stronger than they were. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever came next. The forest around Mary seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy, and still. The figure, whatever it had been, had faded into the shadows, but the chill it left in its wake lingered in the pit of her stomach. She had turned her back on it on the shadows, but the remnants of its presence still clung to her, whispering in the quiet moments of her thoughts. The road ahead was still long, still uncertain, but Mary knew deep within her that the only way forward was through it. She wasn't sure how long she walked the path, blurring around her as she moved through the night. The world felt strangely empty, like she was suspended in some liminal space, neither truly here nor there. It was like the road itself had become a metaphor for her journey. No clear beginning, no clear end, just a never-ending expanse stretching into the unknown. As she walked, her thoughts circled back to Daniel, the man she had fought for, the man she had lost, and in some ways, the man she had saved. She had seen him consumed by the house's curse, twisted into something unrecognizable, but she had freed him, or at least she had tried to. Her fingers tightened around the jade charm she still carried. It was no longer glowing with the same intensity it had before, but its weight was still a comfort, reminding her of the strength she had gained. The charm had been her anchor, her lifeline in the darkness, but she knew now that her true strength wasn't in the charm, it was in her. It had always been in her. The shadows that had once seemed so overwhelming, so suffocating, were no longer something to fear. She had faced them, fought them, and come out stronger. The evil that had lurked in the house and the doll in the darkness, it was all part of her story now. But it was no longer the defining force in her life. With every step she took, Mary felt herself shedding the weight of the past, the darkness that had been a part of her life for so long. The curse may have followed her, but it could never control her again. The path ahead was still unclear, but she didn't need to know every step. She had faced the worst of it. She had fought the darkness, and won. The trees around her began to thin the path ahead, opening into a wider space. She could see the outline of a small cabin in the distance, its silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. It was simple, almost quaint, sitting alone at the edge of the forest, surrounded by the quiet of the night. Mary's heart skipped a beat. It was unexpected, out of place in the vastness of the wilderness, but it was there like a beacon calling to her. She didn't know why, but something inside her urged her to move toward it. As she drew closer, she noticed the soft glow of light from within the warm flicker of a lantern casting shadows on the walls. A strange sense of calm settled over her, as if the house she had escaped from the curse that had haunted her for so long had finally given way to something new, something safe. She stepped onto the porch, her hand hesitating over the doorknob. It was an odd sensation, the feeling of home, but it wasn't the home she had once known. It wasn't the house that had tried to break her. This was something different. A chance. A fresh start. She knocked lightly on the door, the sound soft in the still night. There was no immediate response, but she felt a strange comfort in the silence that followed. She didn't need to rush anymore. The world had slowed down for her. She didn't need to run from the past. She could face it, carry it, and move forward. The door creaked open and a figure stepped into the doorway. Mary's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't anyone she recognized. The person standing before her was a woman older, perhaps in her 50s, with silver hair that cascaded in soft waves down her back. Her face was weathered kind, but hardened by time and experience. Her eyes, however, were sharp, perceptive. She was the sort of person who had seen things, lived through things, and yet still managed to carry herself with an inner strength. "Can I help you?" The woman's voice was gentle, but there was a firmness to it. She didn't seem startled, as though she had been expecting Mary. I don't know," Mary said softly, unsure of how to explain herself. She hadn't planned to stop here. She hadn't planned to find anything at all. She had only been walking following a road she couldn't even fully see. But this was different. Something about this place felt right, and the woman standing in front of her gave her a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she'd been searching for. The woman studied her for a moment as if sensing something unspoken in Mary's words. Then she stepped aside, gesturing for Mary to come in. "You look like you've been on a long journey. Perhaps you should come inside. It's cold out here." Mary hesitated for a moment, but then, without another thought, she stepped into the warmth of the cabin. The scent of wood smoke herbs and something floral filled the air. It was cozy, simple, a stark contrast to the broken ruins of the house she had left behind. The woman led her to a chair by the hearth, where a fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room. Mary sat grateful for the warmth, her muscles aching from the long night of walking. The woman took a seat across from her, studying her with quiet interest. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" Mary nodded slowly, unsure of how to answer. It wasn't just the miles she had walked. It was the distance she had traveled within herself. She had fought darkness, faced fears that had seemed insurmountable, and in the end, she had won. But now she had to ask herself the same question the woman had posed. What was the journey? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she felt the weight of everything. The house, the curse, the shadows start to lift piece by piece. It wasn't gone completely, she knew that. But for the first time in so long, she felt like she could breathe again. I think I'm finally ready to move on," Mary said softly. The woman nodded her eyes, understanding. "We all carry our past with us, child. But sometimes it's time to let go of the things that weigh us down. You're here for a reason, whether you understand it yet or not." Mary looked up at her, feeling a quiet peace settle within her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. The road ahead was still unknown, but she was finally ready to walk it step by step, knowing that the journey would lead her to where she was meant to be. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around Mary, a stark contrast to the long, lonely night she had spent walking in the darkness. She felt herself relax into the chair by the fire, the heat of it seeping into her cold limbs, the soothing crackle of the flames filling the space with a sense of calm. The woman across from her, who had invited her in, regarded her with gentle, knowing eyes. She was calm, steady, someone who had seen, much, lived through much, and yet remained unshaken. "You've been through a lot," the woman said softly, her voice as steady as the firelight. "But you've made it here, and that's something to be proud of." Mary nodded, feeling the weight of the truth in those words. She had made it. She had fought against the darkest forces imaginable, against the curse of the house, the shadows that had tried to consume her, and in the end, she had come out the other side scarred but alive. The woman's gaze softened as though she could read the thoughts running through Mary's mind. "I know it doesn't feel like it now," she said gently, "but the hardest part is over. You've confronted what was haunting you, and you found the strength to survive." Mary looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly despite the warmth of the room. The charm in her palm, though dim, still felt like a part of her. Her connection to the battle she had fought, to the dark presence that had once ruled her life. The house, the curse, the things she had lost. They were all still there, lingering in the shadows of her mind. But they didn't define her anymore. She looked up at the woman, meeting her eyes for the first time since stepping into the cabin. "I don't know where to go from here," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know what comes next." The woman smiled, a small, understanding smile. "That's the thing about new beginnings, isn't it? She stood and moved to a small table in the corner, pulling out a kettle and setting it on the stove. You don't always know what comes next, but that's why it's a journey. You take the first step and the rest unfolds as it should. Mary watched her as she prepared the tea, the rhythmic clink of the kettle, and cups filling the quiet between them. There was a peacefulness in the woman's presence, a serenity that Mary hadn't known in years. She had been so consumed by the darkness, by the battle to survive, that she had forgotten what it was like to simply be, to exist in the moment without the weight of past fears crushing down on her. The woman set the tea down in front of Mary, the steam rising in delicate tendrils. The scent of herbs filled the air, calming, soothing. It was the first time in a long while that Mary felt like she could breathe deeply without the lingering taste of fear or regret. I think I'm ready. Mary said the words coming to her with an unexpected ease. It wasn't the certainty she had hoped for, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like enough. The woman sat down across from her again, sipping from her own cup of tea. She didn't speak for a long time, simply letting the silence settle, and in that silence, Mary began to hear something new, a quiet acceptance, a soft whisper in her mind that said, "You're not alone. You've never been alone." The fire crackled, and in the flickering light, Mary finally felt the weight of everything she had faced lift just a little. She had survived. She had fought for her life for Daniel, and she had come out the other side. The darkness would always be there, a part of her, but it no longer controlled her. It was just a shadow, a whisper that would fade with time. For the first time since stepping into the house, Mary felt peace. The kind of peace that came from accepting the past, no longer running from it or trying to escape it. "You've come a long way," the woman said softly, her eyes full of wisdom. "But remember, the journey never ends. It just changes." Mary nodded, feeling the truth of her words sink deep into her heart. The road ahead might be long, uncertain, but it was hers to walk. She could take each step each day as it came, and with each step, she would find herself again. She took a sip of the tea, its warmth seeping into her body, calming the last remnants of fear and doubt. As she sat there, the woman's presence a quiet anchor in the storm of her thoughts, she knew that the road ahead would be filled with new challenges, new beginnings. But it would also be filled with the knowledge that she had the strength to face whatever came next. And for the first time in so long, she believed it. As the night stretched on, the fire slowly dwindled its embers, glowing faintly in the hearth. Mary sat in the quiet warmth of the cabin, the calming scent of herbs and wood smoke filling the air. The woman who had remained silent and steady throughout the evening continued to sip her tea, giving Mary space to think, to breathe, to settle into the peace that had finally begun to take root. The world outside was still and calm, the faint sounds of nocturnal creatures filling the air as the moon climbed higher in the sky. The weight of the past, the darkness that had once consumed her, was now a distant memory. Mary felt the last of the lingering fear ebb away, leaving a quiet sense of contentment in its place. The house, the curse, the battle, it was all behind her now. And yet, despite the peace she now felt, there was still a question lingering in her mind, one that she hadn't been able to shake since she had first set foot in the cabin. She looked up at the woman, her voice tentative as she spoke. "Why are you helping me?" Mary asked softly. "I don't even know your name. And yet you've given me a place to rest." You've given me comfort when I didn't even know I needed it." The woman smiled a serene and knowing smile as she placed her cup gently down on the table. Her eyes were kind, but there was something in them, something ancient, as though she had seen many things in her life, things both beautiful and painful. She took a moment before answering the silence between them, almost as comforting as the words themselves. Sometimes the woman began, her voice soft and steady. "We all need a little help, a little guidance. The road you've walked has been difficult, but it's not the end of your journey, Mary. It's just the beginning of something else." Mary felt the weight of those words, her chest tightening as she processed them. The house had been the epicenter of her pain, the source of her fear. It had shaped her for so long, and now it was gone. But the journey was far from over. There was so much ahead of her, so much unknown. She had fought against the darkness, but the question now was what she would do in its absence. "Do you believe we can ever truly leave our past behind?" Mary asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached over and placed a hand gently on Mary's. The touch was warm, grounding. "No," she said, finally. "Our past is always a part of us, whether we want it to be or not. But that doesn't mean we have to let it control us. We carry it with us, yes, but we also have the power to shape who we are and who we will become." Mary absorbed the weight of the woman's words. She had spent so much time running from the past, fighting the house, the curse, the shadows that had stalked her every step. But now she understood. The past didn't need to define her. It didn't need to consume her. She had survived it. She had fought through it. So Mary set her voice steadier. "Now what happens next?" The woman smiled gently. "That's for you to decide, Mary. The future is wide open. You've already begun your journey, this part of it anyway. But there are many roads to take, many paths to follow. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Just walk forward. Take the next step." Mary nodded slowly, the weight of her own fears starting to loosen its grip on her heart. She didn't have to know everything, didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't need to run from her past anymore. She didn't need to fight the darkness that had shaped her. She had already faced it and come out stronger for it. For the first time in years, Mary felt a sense of quiet assurance, as if a door had been opened before her. The future was no longer a looming shadow filled with uncertainty. It was a space filled with possibility. She could move forward, take each day as it came, and continue to build her own life step by step. The woman stood, then walking over to a small bookshelf in the corner and pulling down a worn, leather-bound book. She handed it to Mary with a soft smile. "This is for you," she said, her voice gentle. "A small gift to help guide you on your journey." Mary took the book in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the rough texture of the leather beneath her fingers. It felt old, ancient, even like it held secrets in its pages. She looked up at the woman, a silent question in her eyes. "It's a journal," the woman explained, "to help you remember, to help you make sense of everything that's happened. Sometimes writing down your thoughts helps to make them clearer. And maybe someday you'll look back and understand why everything happened the way it did." Mary didn't know what to say at first, but then she realized that the woman had given her more than just a journal. She had given her a tool, something to help her process the next steps, to understand her journey, and to keep moving forward. "Thank you," Mary said softly, her voice full of gratitude. She wasn't sure what was ahead, but she had a feeling that this journal would be an important part of her journey. She could already feel its weight in her hands, and somehow it felt like the first step toward healing. The woman nodded, a knowing smile on her face. "You're welcome. Now get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day, and your journey continues." Mary smiled back, a small but genuine smile. She had come so far. She had fought, survived, and now she was ready for the next chapter. She wasn't sure where it would lead her, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. With the book in her hands and the warmth of the cabin surrounding her, Mary closed her eyes. The fire crackled softly, and the sounds of the night outside began to lull her into a peaceful sleep. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer afraid of the darkness. She had faced it. She had conquered it, and now for the first time in a long time she could rest,